There are some experiences in life that you just had to be there to understand. To many of us, that was NBA basketball in the 1990s. A lot of people view this period of time as the absolute pinnacle of professional basketball, and not just in terms of the competition on the court, but also in terms of how the product was presented. You didn't have sensationalists working on the broadcasts just to stir up division, but rather just people who knew their stuff and had a genuine passion for the game. Back then, we were not endlessly bombarded with excessive advertisements on the court, on the jerseys, and during the free throws. Spectators and fans weren't preoccupied with their overs and unders. There was no concern for fantasy scores or viral moments, but rather, people just cared about their teams and about their favorite players winning. It seemed as if passion and personality was involved in every corner of the product, whether it was in the players, the fans, the merchandise, or in the graphic design. Nothing was bland. Everything was rich with life. There wasn't fear of your favorite player sitting out because of a stubbed toe, as guys took pride in showing up for work during that era. Also, the game was anything but boring, as the league was led by a collection of stars who each brought their own unique style and flair to the sport. In many ways, the NBA in the 1990s was basketball entertainment in its purest form. Sure, there was a couple of floppers, but they were few and far between. And sure, there were stars who missed games, but you almost never questioned their toughness and their passion when they did, because at the end of the day, we believed that everyone who was a part of this game loved this game. That's why those of us who lived through the 90s will never be done with the 90s. Because it's essentially everything NBA competition was meant to be. Now, people can just dismiss it as nostalgia or just label us as old men yelling at the sky. But deep down, those accusers long for the same things as us. And that's a game that's real, a game with passion, and a game with conviction. For those of us who were there, you get it. If you know, you know. It's quite simple, actually. When you've experienced the best, you'll settle for nothing less.
Jordan. Oh, a spectacular move by Michael.
Here's the thing. Anytime this highlight pops up nowadays on social media, you will find commenters in the thread saying that the play is overrated, that it wasn't anything special, and that modern players have done things similar or way more impressive. And that we only make a big deal about it because it was from Michael Jordan. Although I do find these reoccurring comments very annoying, I can't really blame younger fans for thinking these things, because there's just no way that they could really understand the context and the magnitude of the moment, unless someone explained it to them in detail. So that's what I'm doing today, as I'm telling you the story and the significance behind the most iconic layup of Michael Jordan's career. In June of 1991, the NBA audience was preparing itself to see a dream matchup in the NBA Finals, Magic versus Michael. The two biggest stars in the NBA and the top two MVP finalists of the league were set to square off on the game's biggest stage. Magic was 1 year removed from being the league MVP, and as a guy who was the face of 1980s basketball, he won 5 NBA championship rings during that decade. So in reality, Magic's legacy was already firmly established in a very positive light. You could even go as far as saying that he had nothing left to prove on the basketball court. On the other hand, there was Michael Jordan. Now, although MJ was already being celebrated for his transcendent talent, there was still something missing from his legacy and reputation. He wasn't widely regarded yet as a winner. You see, at this point in time, people had a different idea of what it took to win championships. Throughout the vast majority of NBA history, it had been the facilitators and team-first players who won the championships, and not the scoring leaders. In the 1960s, Wilt Chamberlain was breaking scoring records, but it was Bill Russell who won most of the championships. In the 1980s, players like Dominique Wilkins, Alex English, and Adrian Dantley were winning the scoring titles, but it was first-team leaders like Larry Bird and Magic Johnson who were winning all of the NBA titles. So with this being the case, a widespread narrative was established. that leading scorers don't win championships. Team leaders do. Many people were using this as a criticism against Michael Jordan, that he's a one-man show, that he doesn't include his teammates enough, and that he'll ultimately never be as successful as Magic and Bird. Think about it. Michael Jordan was 28 years old at that point in time, yet he still didn't have a single championship ring. At that same age, Magic Johnson already had all 5 of his championship rings, and Larry Bird had 2. So relatively to his elder competitors, Jordan was behind schedule, and much of the basketball world started to speculate that it was due to a flaw in his leadership and approach. These were the narratives heading into the 1991 NBA Finals. Yes, both stars were beloved and admired on a large scale, but without question, Jordan had a monkey to get off his back, while Magic did not. The conclusion of Game 1 didn't help Jordan's case. Magic had a triple-double and led his Lakers to a victory. And although Jordan did have a monstrous performance both as a scorer and as a passer, when the game was on the line, MJ came up short, as his potential game-tying jumper rattled in and out. Now the Lakers had stolen home court advantage from Chicago, and whether it was fair or not, it looked like the narratives might persist about these two superstars. To describe Game 2 as being crucial for the Bulls would be an understatement, as it would be devastating if they were to lose their first 2 games on their home floor. The game was competitive throughout the first half, while Jordan was looking to be more of a distributor. MJ barely looked to score in the first half, but in the second half, he became extremely aggressive, while maintaining a level of efficiency that was difficult to believe. Michael Jordan wasn't just hot in the third and fourth quarter, but he quite possibly put on the hottest scoring display in a single half of finals history. He was literally automatic. He was in the process of breaking the finals record for the most consecutive field goals made without a miss. Within this span, it went from a close and competitive contest to an absolute blowout. Jordan got up to 12 consecutive field goals made without a miss, and the crowd was going absolutely nuts. He was taking over on the game's ultimate stage, proving that he can win at the highest level while being a leading scorer. Then the highlight happened, when Jordan made the iconic hand-switch layup, which was now his 13th straight shot without a miss. Even the typically stoic Phil Jackson had to shake his head in amazement, as Michael was quite literally playing perfect basketball over an extended period of time. When I watched this game for the first time as a kid, it almost seemed like Jordan was so hot that he faked the dunk and switched to his offhand, just to make the shot more difficult on himself. According to Michael, he did it because he thought Sam Perkins was going to jump and contest the shot on his right side, so he then switched to his left. Not only did the Bulls proceed to win this game, but they wouldn't lose another game in this final series, as they won their first of 6 championships. So yes, the shot itself was very impressive, but it's everything else around it that made it so special, so iconic, and so timeless, like the record-breaking streak and the destruction of a narrative that once hindered Jordan's legacy. Because of how the Bulls took the momentum with authority in Game 2, this image became a symbol of many things. In a way, it was the start of their dynasty. It was the moment where MJ ripped the torch out of Magic Johnson's hand and led the league his way moving forward. It became the symbolic image of Jordan reaching his prime and becoming not just the league's best player, but its new definition of a winner. Now, could another athlete today make this same shot with this same degree of difficulty? Absolutely. But come back to me when someone does this in the NBA Finals, while making 13 consecutive field goals, while asserting himself as the new face of the league, while defeating his greatest competitor. The truth is, this sequence was one of a kind, and we've never seen anything quite like it since, and we likely never will.
Patrick has that task.
There have been nearly as many new Jordan clones as old Jordan championships. Grant, Penny, Jerry, Kobe.
And here's the kid to slam it. Whoa!
The answer. They all left questions, but the latest look-alike most closely profiles the infant Mike. Tar Heel pedigree, dazzling smile, leaves school early, becomes team go-to guy, resurrects Hoopstead City, jumps over the moon, air to land to high sea, sea as in Carter, Vince Carter.
Both of us slashers like to get to the basket and do highlight real dunks or whatever.
Vince has exploded on the scene. Michael came a little more quietly, kind of subtly. He had all aspects of what he did later on, but that had to curate, or if that's the word, cure, as a ham would do.
As Jordan did do, Carter is curing himself into quite a ham.
I know that Michael, meant a lot for the NBA. And I think right now Vince is that same type of commodity.
I can see it, but let's not get ridiculous. You're talking about Michael Jordan.
The difference in him is that Vince does not have the ball handling ability that MJ had.
MJ is often imitated, never duplicated. But you have to say that he's the next thing close to MJ.
Nobody remembers Michael Jordan except maybe you and Kevin Lockery in his rookie year and how much he developed during the course of his career. Vince Carter does some things better than Michael did when he first came in the league. Vince Carter can stroke the three-pointer. Michael was a marginal perimeter shooter when he started off. Vince Carter blocks shots, leads his team in block shots, gets 6 rebounds a game, and has electrifying play very similar to Michael Jordan when he takes the ball to the basket. So it's not a comparison that's out of this world, really. There are similarities between the two guys, and you might even say Vince Carter has a little edge on the Michael Jordan who was a rookie.
Is there pressure as you grow in stature that every arena you go to, people come out to see Vince Carter?
So there's been a rather interesting conversation happening on social media over the last couple of days concerning one of the most highlight-worthy players in the history of the game. Nowadays, Vince Carter is known as the greatest dunker of all time and is recognized for the incredible talent that he was during his prime. But was he actually the face of the NBA at one point in time? The mere suggestion might sound crazy to some, because although Carter was extremely talented, it's hard for younger fans to envision how he could be that popular and that highly regarded while guys like Kobe Bryant, Shaquille O'Neal, Allen Iverson, and Tim Duncan were in the league simultaneously. Well, the truth is, there's some important context that younger fans are often missing. For one, Vince Carter was drafted the same offseason that Michael Jordan retired from the Chicago Bulls. At that point in time, the league office was deeply concerned about the NBA's life after Michael Jordan. And for good reason. MJ's iconic popularity helped make basketball a global sport. And under MJ's reign, the NBA experienced the greatest television ratings that it's ever had. Because of this, the media was obsessed with the idea of finding the quote, next Michael Jordan. And several players were given that mantle, and some very prematurely. Guys like Harold Miner, Jerry Stackhouse, Grant Hill, and obviously Kobe Bryant were all put under that immense pressure. But even more recently to receive that comparison was half-man, half-amazing Vince Carter. Honestly, unlike some of the others, this comparison made total sense at the time. Like Michael Jordan, Carter was a former North Carolina Tar Heel. He had a remarkable leaping ability and had the perfect combination of skill and athleticism. Now, of course, the NBA isn't just a sport, but it's also a business. And you'd be silly to think that the league doesn't have its own money-making agenda when they decide who to promote. Vince Carter was the perfect candidate for this role, because he had just made his league debut with the Toronto Raptors in 1998. And the Raptors were a new expansion team, who had the responsibility of making the league popular in another country. From that perspective, it made sense for the league to relentlessly promote Carter, because the potential extra revenue was immense, and thus Air Canada was born. Now, Carter had an impressive rookie season that even had some people saying that he was on the level of Michael Jordan in his rookie year. But the hype train truly reached its insane heights during the 1999 to 2000 season. As you all know, Carter put on an absolute show during the All-Star weekend, And then, later on that summer, he led Team USA to the gold medal in the Olympics, while accomplishing the greatest highlight in Olympic basketball history. This was the beginning of Carter leading the NBA in All-Star votes, including 3 straight seasons from 2000 to 2002. That's right, more people wanted Carter in the All-Star game than Allen Iverson and Tim Duncan while they were winning MVPs, and even more so than Kobe Bryant and Shaquille O'Neal while they were winning championships. Vinsanity was on the cover of video games, magazines, he was in music videos, TV shows, and movies. If basketball was anywhere, you could find Carter there between 1999 to 2002. Now, this next personal point might seem a little silly, but I think it appropriately emphasizes how the basketball community viewed Vince Carter at the time. So basically, I've been an avid card collector ever since I was a child, and throughout my years of collecting cards, I've been picking up these Beckett Price Guide magazines, which basically tells you the market value of your cards and the confidence level that investors have in certain players and their potential. If you were to pick up a recent issue like this one I've got here, then you'll see that Michael Jordan, LeBron James, and Kobe Bryant have some of the most valuable cards, as expected. Now, this issue of mine is much older. This is the August issue from the year 2000, meaning Shaq and Kobe just won their first championship. And even with that being the case, Vince Carter still had the most valuable cards on the market of any active player, more so than Kobe, Shaq, Duncan, or Allen Iverson. It wasn't until this issue, in March of 2003, that I noticed that Kobe's cards had finally surpassed Carter's in terms of value. It took 3 straight championships from Kobe for people to finally think that Carter was no longer the card to chase, which is insane when you think about it. If you ask me, Vince Carter was definitely the face of the NBA, although it was a short stint compared to some legends of the game. I would say from 1999 until about May of 2001, Carter was the guy that the league was promoting as the face of their sport. But with his missed shot in Game 7 of the 2001 East semifinals, that's the moment where I believe the momentum shifted, and Allen Iverson became the face of the Eastern Conference, while Shaq and Kobe were becoming the faces of the league as a whole. If you're a young basketball fan, then you've probably been witnessing a lot of interesting things happening on the internet over the last 24 hours. Plenty of quote old heads everywhere are collectively losing their minds at the NBA's return to NBC. But you might be asking yourself, why? What is it about this basic network that makes everyone go crazy? Well, there are plenty of people who are qualified to speak on this, and I consider myself one of those people. As someone who was born in the late 1980s, my passion for the game of basketball started to develop right as I was beginning to attain memories. I lived through many of these years and I ate it up. But my dad was also cool enough to record every significant game on VHS tapes, because that's what you did when you had a VCR back in the day. I watched these games on repeat, and those were the first steps in my journey that eventually led to this basketball channel that obsesses over NBA history. So now you might be saying to yourself, that's it? So that's really all it's about? Nostalgia? Well, of course that's a part of it. If you asked me what the Round Ball Rock theme sounds like, I would say that it sounds like falling in love with the game of basketball. The whole thing left such an impression on me that I'll never forget. But again, it was a lot more than just the nostalgia. It was great programming. NBC's agenda was simple: put on a great show and make a lot of money while doing it. And they certainly succeeded, as the greatest viewership ratings in NBA history came on their watch. When a playoff game was on NBC, it didn't just feel like a basketball game. It felt like an epic story that was all building to this very moment. Right as the pregame would start, there would be a dramatic montage of highlights, accompanied with background music from whatever movie was popular at the time. Narrated by either the legendary Marv Albert or Bob Costas, they would tell you the story of each team leading up to this event, and explain in epic detail what was at stake. It was almost like a fascinating NBA YouTube video before YouTube was even a thing. This would then transition seamlessly into the iconic intro, followed by pregame analysis from people who were actually great at their jobs. Imagine that. Almost everyone who was involved was either fantastic on the mic or knew the game on a deep level. There was basically never just talking heads put on the network purely for stirring up emotions like there is today. And then there was the most important piece to the puzzle, the product on the court. 1990s NBA basketball was dominated by fierce competitors, and the intensity on the court fit the scene, as physicality and trash talking was something that was celebrated, rather than being quickly eliminated by soft referees. In more ways than one, the NBA on NBC represented the golden age of the NBA. Whether or not they'll be able to replicate that same experience for a new generation of fans remains to be seen. But for those of us who were there to initially experience it, this feels like a return to our first love that we never thought we'd see again.
The other day, P, we want to pull some quotes from you, and your quote was that you thought Michael Jordan had a very limited bag. I would like you to expand on that.
Well, in today's...
You're talking about today's game?
In today's game.
Okay, so you analyze... Hold on, let me set it up. So you analyzing Michael Jordan's game in today's game.
Right.
Okay,
yeah.
gotcha.
Like, what's considered a bag is like, and it's like no real set definition of it, because you just look like, you look at guys, when you say, all right, who got a bag in the league, you instantly go to like Kyrie, James Harden, but these is guys who need multiple moves to get cracking. Like Jordan didn't need multiple moves. He just right by you. One dribble pull up, fade away. You know, for that era, that was great. Like now it's a one-on-one league to where it's like you really gotta like to get by your man on the switches and everything.
Many unbearable hours later.
Now you playing, that is a whole nother thing.
It's like based around how
people
you
who
get
know how to
yours
score
off
the
with
ball,
your
score the
handles.
ball. They don't play with food. Like if you can get to the cup and dunk the ball, you dunk it every time, right? So if you can, you do that. All right, cool. If he cuts you off, you can cross him over, boom, right? A bag is being able to be in traffic and make a traffic decision, and boom, you make it right there. You know, I faced up, boom, he went middle, I saw him middle, I gave it. So, and then on top of it, Michael Jordan was one of the more aggressor offensive players. Oh man, can't nobody guard that motherfucker today. Mike would grab your face if you tried to jump before him, bro. This nigga would grab your arm. Like, man, listen, man, I'm sorry. I respect every era, and I'm gonna keep respecting every era. Y'all need to go back and watch some of that young Mike Jordan. Y'all need to go watch that Mike Jordan who went up against Larry Bird. You know what I'm talking about? That went up against the Pistons. And with physical play, by the way. And was downhill. And when he needed a three, he could hit a three. And he hit game winners. And he came back from 15 down in the fourth. And yeah, man, what? And then he was a goon. He was a real nigga. Y'all got me fucked up in here, boy. Y'all better put some respect on Mike's name. Boy, stop saying goofy shit, man. That's goofy as hell. Mike Jordan ain't got a bag, P? Man, stop, man.
No, nobody said he ain't had no bag.
Y'all said he had a limited bag.
I can care less about a bag. I ain't saying not having a bag ain't good.
Man, you got to have a bag. If you scoring anything over 20,000, 30,000, bro, you got to have a bag. You understand? Because they going to put the best stopper on you.
Did Shaq have a bag?
Shaq had a bag? Shaq was one all dunks. Shaq had a jump hook, a left.
Dream had a bag.
Out of here. Okay, that's what I'm saying. Shaq dunked the ball majority of the time, but he had a jump hook, he had a left hand, he had a motherfucker, a fadeaway. What you talking about?
So what you just saw was a clip that's been going viral between Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce, where KG is basically roasting Pierce for 3 minutes straight, while Pierce is desperately backpedaling as he tries to reframe his original point. This all started when Danny Green and Paul Pierce were talking on a podcast about Michael Jordan having a quote limited bag. And for a moment, I thought about making a video on this MJ topic, but I ultimately decided against it. Because, to be frank, the subject matter is so painfully stupid that it wasn't really worth my time and effort. Michael Jordan is arguably the most skilled player in the history of the game. And if you look at his game and then claim that his array of moves was limited by the standards of any era, then you either have an incredibly low basketball IQ, or you're just being disingenuous because of a hidden agenda. Those are literally the only two possibilities.
This is why saying Jordan doesn't have a bag is a silly statement to me. Here's what a bag is, according to what I think and what a lot of you guys think too. I've literally had these discussions with you in the comment section. A bag is basically a tool set. It represents I have all of these moves, all of these different ways that I can score on you. I'm going to pick one. And after I pick one, if you counter that move, I can reach into my bag and counter your counter over and over and over again until I eventually do score on you. In other words, you can't stop me because my bag is so deep. That's what a bag is. And if that doesn't describe Michael Jordan, who the hell does it describe? Literally, like, I feel like that term was invented for a guy like Michael Jordan.
So yeah, I basically just disregarded that one because I'm tired of acknowledging these forced talking points. But what Paul Pierce said about Shaq was way more intriguing, and is a common narrative that I don't fault anyone for thinking. He claimed that Shaquille O'Neal didn't have a quote bag, implying that Shaq's moves were very limited. A lot of people think this, and think that Shaq was just out there overpowering players and dunking 99% of the time. Now, did Shaq do a lot of that? Absolutely. That's part of what made him so special. But to act like that's all he had to his game is just very inaccurate. In the very prime of his career, there was a couple of the most dominant performances I have ever seen from the Diesel, and it was during the first 2 games of the 2000 NBA Finals, where he had 43 points and 19 rebounds and 40 points and 24 rebounds. I could just tell you about how he did his scoring in these finals, but if you haven't seen it for yourself, then it'll make a greater impression for you to just be able to visualize it. This is what his scoring and his bag looked like in these performances.
Looking for Shaq, who takes it in deep.
You can't leak out looking for the fast break.
Shaquille O'Neal, his field goal attempts. O'Neal juggles it, recovers. O'Neal, little fadeaway. Bryant, Smith's out on him on a switch. Here's Shaq for the jumper from Ron Harper. In deep to O'Neal. O'Neal's turnaround. Bryant with the miss. O'Neal with the recovery against the smaller Perkins. Now they surround him. He gets and they go to O'Neal. His hook is no good, but there's Rice with the follow, and now it's all. Shaq's got the rebound and the follow. Shaw just in, gives it to Shaq, and Shaq's shot was partially blocked. Shaw from Rick Fox in the front court. O'Neal finds Ori with a nice passer. O'Neal over Crozier for the rebound. Power. Wearing number 17 for the Pacers. Deep to O'Neal. O'Neal again.
O'Neal. Where they want to use clock and stay organized and look for that line.
Shaquille O'Neal finds AC Green with a nice shot clock. Reggie defending. Kobe finds Shaq. O'Neal, turnaround from near the foul. O'Neal over Perkins. Gonna follow his own here. Shaw lobs it for Shaq. O'Neal.
Now Smith has 3 fouls. He's got to stay away from his 4th.
O'Neal, turnaround.
Tonight and probably wouldn't play game 3.
Harper looking for Shaq. They get it deep to him.
A defensive player, and that's where he's going to really have to step it up.
Rice into the lane. Shaq to finish it up.
No layups, no dunks.
He looks for Ori away.
Notice the footwork, the post moves, the tactics about getting into favorable positions to score. Not sure if you were counting, but Shaq had more jump shots in these games than dunks. He also had more jump hooks than dunks. Simply put, Shaq's game was a lot more complex than he usually gets credit for. Sure, his skills and moves were not nearly as polished as Hakeem Olajuwon, but he had a bag of moves, that's for sure. He had a solid drop-step move, stellar footwork, a solid fade, a reliable one-handed jumper, and a remarkably quick first step. Now don't get me wrong, there were games where he primarily dunked the basketball, like in his 44-point performance in Game 1 of the 2001 NBA Finals, where he was going at Dikembe Mutombo's throat. In that contest, half of his baskets were dunks, and he took full advantage of Mutombo's skinny frame. But that's part of the beauty of it. Shaq had the skills and abilities to adjust his game based on whoever was defending him at the time. If it was a big-bodied 7'4" Rick Smits, then he could rely on his mid-range game. But if it was against a skinnier player like Mutombo, then he could have a more bullying approach. Ultimately, everything I'm saying isn't the most groundbreaking stuff to many of us who actually watched Shaq play in his prime. But as time goes on, and as more people start to enter basketball discussions who didn't actually see him at his peak, Shaq starts to become more like a Wilt Chamberlain type mythological figure, so it's easy for them to have misconceptions about what his game was like. Yes, Shaq was an absolute monster, but there's no question in my mind that he was a skilled monster as well. An often forgotten era of Lakers history was the small window of time between Magic Johnson's retirement and the Shaq and Kobe acquisitions. By their standards, the mid-90s was a rough and drama-filled era for the purple and gold. But at the very least, you'd be wrong if you assumed that they were never competitive. Players like Eldon Campbell, Cedric Ceballos, and Eddie Jones were some of the major names on the roster during that time. But one other guy was especially the life of the party, and was the closest thing to Showtime that the Lakers had without Magic Johnson. Unfortunately, his career would go on to be utterly derailed because of one very stupid thing he would say at a crucial part of an NBA season. I'm talking about the 6'1" point guard, Nick the Quick Van Exel. To put it simply, Van Exel was a walking, breathing highlight. The best way I could describe him is picture a smaller Jamal Crawford, but as a much better passer. In a similar fashion, Van Exel had a filthy handle of the basketball, as he consistently made defenders look foolish with his killer crossover and misdirection. He was a solid three-point shooter and a reliable floor general. Not much was expected of Van Exel when he originally came to the NBA. He was drafted by the Lakers in the second round of the 1993 NBA draft. With that being said, it wouldn't take very long for the league to see what he was capable of, as he displayed his exceptional skills on the court, and averaged nearly 14 points and 6 assists in his rookie season in the NBA. The very next season, his game would take a massive leap forward, as he increased his scoring to 17 points per game and his assists to 8.3 per contest, as he established himself as a respectable dual threat. Those weren't the only things about his game that was noteworthy though. Van Exel had the skills to create his own shot at will, and over time, he became known as one of the best clutch shot makers that the league had to offer. It didn't matter if he was double teamed, off balance, or 40 feet away. If Van Exel was shooting the final shot, there was a very good chance that it was going in. Not everything was sunshine and rainbows during his time with the Lakers though. During Magic Johnson's brief return in the 95-96 season, a lack of chemistry became a major issue for this squad, as Van Exel was frustrated that he had to relinquish some of his orchestrating responsibilities to Magic. Van Exel also had problems with authority, but especially in the case of dealing with the Lakers head coach, Del Harris. He didn't respect Harris and often ignored his coach's requests. It had reached such a boiling point that the two nearly got into a fight during a team practice, where the other players had to step in and physically intervene. Speaking of which, Van Exel was also known to have a temper, and his explosive attitude often got the best of him on the basketball court, as he was often at the center of any altercation and was suspended quite frequently as a result. He wasn't quite on Dennis Rodman's level of dramatic locker room distractions, but in the 1990s, Nick was about as close as it got. Still, his talent on the court could not be denied, and after the Lakers had acquired a prime Shaquille O'Neal and a young Kobe Bryant, it appeared as if he would have an opportunity to be the leading floor general on a championship team. In the 97-98 season, at the age of 26, Van Exel was selected to his first All-Star game, alongside of his fellow stars of Shaq, Kobe, and Eddie Jones, making them one of the few teams in NBA history to have 4 All-Stars on the roster simultaneously. This incredibly talented group went 61-21 throughout the regular season, and had many people believing that they were the favorites to represent the West in the NBA Finals. Unfortunately, for the second straight season, they ran into the Utah Jazz, this time in the Western Conference Finals. They had no answers for the pick and roll of Stockton and Malone, while Utah's defense did a fantastic job of limiting the Lakers' perimeter weapons. The Lakers quickly fell behind in the series 3-0. As a result, the lack of energy in the Lakers' locker room was borderline depressing. In order for them to win the series and advance to the NBA Finals, they would have to do something that no team has ever done before in league history, and that's come back from an 0-3 deficit. Sure, none of the Lakers players were feeling particularly confident in that moment, but at the very least, none of them had flat out quit and accepted defeat. Well, that was until the last team practice before Game 4. At the end of that practice session, the players huddled up, put their hands in the middle, and in unison said 1, 2, 3, team, which is what they had done throughout that entire season. The thing is, that's not what Van Exel said. Instead, this was the moment where his lack of maturity dealt its most brutal consequences. This was the moment where Van Exel made a decision that would not only ruin his NBA career, but it would result in him largely being forgotten in the city of Los Angeles. Instead of 1, 2, 3, team, in a jokingly manner, Nick said 1, 2, 3, Cancun, implying that the Lakers were on their way to a vacation in Cancun after they would get eliminated in Game 4. According to Jeff Pearlman's book 3 Ring Circus, the gym went dead quiet. Kobe Bryant looked at his teammate as if he had just spoiled milk. Rick Fox was equally disgusted, whispering, "Can you believe this?" to O'Neal. Even Eddie Jones, Van Exel's friend, was taken aback. "What the hell was that about?" he asked. O'Neal went directly to General Manager Jerry West's office to tell him about the incident, to which the veteran executive said bluntly, "After all of this ends, Nick is done here." Things then proceeded to go exactly how you'd expect. The Lakers were eliminated in Game 4, and Nick Van Exel was promptly traded away from the team.
And then, of course, we got Shaq and Kobe, and, it went to a whole different level. And then they traded my ass.
How devastated were you?
I was not devastated.
You were not?
It was time to go.
Okay.
Well, let me change it. I was upset because of the location they sent me.
Denver?
I wanted to leave, but at the time, Denver was one of the worst teams in the NBA. So Jerry West was like, "Okay, I'm going to stick it to your little ass." And he did.
Now, as Van Exel alluded to, he wasn't just traded away from the Lakers, but he was purposely punished by Jerry West, as he was sent to the Denver Nuggets, who were the worst team in the entire league, and who had just wrapped up their season with an 11-71 record. Over those next few seasons in Denver, Van Exel would have his best season statistically, getting as high as 19 points per game and 9 assists per game. But naturally, no one cared, because the team was utter garbage. And simultaneously, he had to watch his former Lakers go on to be a dynasty, as they won 3 straight championships. Now into his 30s, Van Exel was moved to a reserve role off the bench, as he became a journeyman, playing 2 seasons in Dallas, 1 season in Golden State, 1 season for Portland, and 1 season for San Antonio. Just think about how crazy all of this was for a second. At the time Van Exel made the Cancun joke in 1998, Shaq was 26 years old and was just starting to reach his prime. Kobe Bryant was 19 years old and was on the verge of becoming a superstar. The Lakers were on the cusp of consistent championship success, but all because of one horrifically timed joke, the Lakers were willing to trade away their all-star floor general to the worst team in the entire league. And tragically, his career would never recover as a result. In an alternate universe, Van Exel shuts his mouth, doesn't get traded away, and goes on to win multiple championships with Shaq and Kobe's Lakers, and gets immortalized fondly in Lakers lore. But in our reality, because of his poor decision making, he's the kind of guy that I have to remind people that he once existed in the NBA.
We lost game 1 because we were so nervous. But game 2, I played as well as I could play.
Barkley from the outside. Barkley.
And Michael just outplayed me. That was probably the first time in my life that I felt like there was a better basketball player in the world than me, to be honest with you. I have no problem losing to Michael.
Losing to Michael, there's no shame in that. Sports are like a gunfight. And we lost to the fastest gun.
Sir Charles, the round mound of rebound. I assume you guys don't need me to tell you that Charles Barkley was one of the all-time greats, and that he's in the argument for the title of the greatest player to never win a championship ring. The thing is, I think someone can be well aware of those things while not giving Chuck the proper amount of respect and credit that he deserves. The main reason I say this is because there's one jaw-dropping aspect of his game that basically no one ever talks about. Now I'll get into that one in a little bit, but let me first explain the basics of what made Sir Charles so special. Despite the fact that Barkley was an undersized power forward who was somewhere between the range of 6'4" to 6'6" tall, he was still able to play the game like a bull in a china shop. In his youth, he was a terrifying combo of speed and power, while possessing an underrated handle of the basketball that enabled him to excel in transition. Barkley was also the epitome of efficiency, as he was often making around 60% of his shots in his prime years, while consistently being a top 10 scorer in the league. He was also one of the greatest rebounders, not just for his size, not just for his era, but he was one of the best overall in league history. At his rebounding best in 1987, Barkley was averaging a monstrous 14.6 rebounds per game, while simultaneously filling up the stat sheet in a multitude of ways. One of my favorite lesser-known details about Charles Barkley is the fact that he was the true MVP of the greatest basketball team ever assembled. Yes, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, and Larry Bird basically hogged all of the attention for the 1992 Dream Team. But ask any honest person who was watching those Olympic Games, and they'll tell you that Barkley was the best player on the court, as he led the team in scoring by far, while hitting an insane 71% of his shots and a stupid 87.5% of his three-point shots. If the Olympic MVP award had existed back then the 92 award certainly would be in his possession. But now, let's get to the part that almost no one ever talks about, but it's the aspect that really deserves your respect. You never hear about it, but Charles Barkley was the epitome of a big game performer. People usually don't connect those dots because the unfortunate reality is that he never won a championship. So people make assumptions that he didn't perform his best when it mattered the most. But that simply wasn't the case. As you saw in the intro, Charles Barkley said in his own words that he lost to the fastest gun, which is an understatement considering that Michael Jordan is the fastest gun in NBA history. In that 1993 NBA Finals, Michael Jordan had arguably the greatest final series of all time, as he averaged an efficient 41 points, 8.5 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 steals, while torching an NBA All-Defender in Dan Marley. Understandably, Michael Jordan's play completely overshadowed Barkley's championship-worthy performance, as he averaged 27 points, 13 rebounds, and 5.5 assists on 48% shooting. This wasn't the only time that Jordan and Barkley met up in the playoffs either. Every single time Jordan and Barkley clashed in the NBA postseason, Barkley came through and put up video game numbers. In the 1990 Eastern Conference semifinals, Chuck averaged 24 points, a monstrous 17 rebounds, and 5 assists, while making 52% of his shots. Then in the 1991 Eastern Conference semis, he averaged 26 points, 10 rebounds, and 5.5 assists on a stellar 64% shooting. Against just about any other star in NBA history, Charles Barkley would have shined the brightest in each of these series. But tragically, it was against Michael Jordan, and this is what MJ did against Barkley. This is how a player can give a championship-level performance while ending up 0-3 against one other player in the playoffs. Usually, I'm not very big into making excuses for guys who ended their careers without a championship ring. But if there's one guy who, quote, ring culture is unfairly applied against, then it's Charles Barkley. Imagine having one of the greatest playoff series that your position has ever seen for 3 straight playoff appearances, and each and every time it resulted in an elimination, simply because you had the unfortunate luck of peaking at the same time as the GOAT. Shaquille O'Neal loves holding these rings over Barkley's head, but he should probably keep in mind that he wasn't winning any of those rings while Jordan was in his prime either. Ever since Michael Jordan shined in his NBA career, media and fans everywhere have been asking who would be the next Michael Jordan. Who would be the player who would rise above the rest of the league, take the game to new heights, and win championship after championship as the new face of the league? Eventually, Kobe Bryant became the man who took the title, and the comparisons were constant. But before the torch had been passed to Kobe, there was another player who held the torch and was referred to as the next Michael Jordan more often than anyone else. Grant Henry Hill, drafted in 1994 by the Detroit Pistons. He was a lengthy 6'8" small forward who had all the skills. He could handle the ball, he could rebound, he could facilitate with the best of them, and he was an efficient scorer, and a force when driving to the rim. He was so good that in a 1996 interview, he received Jordan's seal of approval. MJ was asked in that interview who he sees as the next Michael Jordan, the guy he would pass the torch to when he does inevitably retire. Michael said 2 players, Grant Hill and Penny Hardaway. In Hill's 1994-1995 rookie campaign, he had an immediate impact and his revolutionary talent was clearly on display. For the year, Hill averaged a solid 19.9 points, 6.4 rebounds, 5 assists, and 1.8 steals on 47.7% shooting. When you compare these numbers to the rookie numbers of LeBron James, you can see what kind of impression this man was making upon entering the league. In the 1995-96 season, which was only his second season, Grant Hill led the league in All-Star votes, gaining more votes than even Michael Jordan. This was MJ, the greatest player of all time, in the middle of an MVP year and in the middle of his Bulls' historic 72-10 season. And yet Hill still received the most All-Star votes that year. That should tell you the level of potential that we as fans recognized in Hill during the mid-90s. During that sophomore season, Hill averaged 20.2 points, 9.8 rebounds, 6.9 assists, and 1.3 steals per game. The following year, he improved those numbers, averaging 21.4 points, 9 rebounds, 7.3 assists, and 1.8 steals per game on 49.6% shooting, while also leading the league in triple-doubles. And again, this was only his 3rd season in the league. It was clear to everyone that this man was on a trajectory to be one of the greatest players of all time. At the end of that 1996-97 season, Hill had finished 3rd overall in the MVP voting, behind only Michael Jordan and Karl Malone. Hill was the first person since Larry Bird in the 80s to average over 20 points, over 9 rebounds, and over 7 assists in a season. That hadn't been done again until Russell Westbrook did it in the 2016-2017 season. As his career went on, Hill continued to dominate and lead his Pistons squad. Under his leadership and talent, the Pistons went from a terrible 20-win team to a 54-win team in just 3 seasons. By 1999, Hill was a respected force in the league and was carrying his Pistons. He had led his team in all 3 of these categories, points, rebounds, and assists in 3 seasons. The only other player in NBA history to lead his team in points, rebounds, and assists 3 times is Wilt Chamberlain. In the 1999-2000 season, Grant was having the best year of his career, averaging 25.8 points, 6.6 rebounds, and 5.2 assists on 49% shooting. He was only 27 years old and just starting to reach the prime of his career. And unfortunately, that's when it all came crashing down for Grant Hill. With only 3 games left in the regular season, Hill brutally sprained his ankle, in an injury that would essentially ruin his days as an elite-level player. His first 6 years in the league was one of the greatest starts to a career the NBA had ever seen, but he would never be the same after the injury. To give you even more evidence on just how special he was, after those first 6 seasons of his career before his ankle injury, he had a total of 9,393 points, 3,417 rebounds, and 2,720 assists. Oscar Robertson, Larry Bird, and LeBron James are the only 3 players in league history to eclipse these numbers after their first 6 seasons in the league. In the next 6 years of his career after his first ankle injury, he would have ongoing issues with the ankle and even had to have surgery. In those years, Hill missed a whopping 357 games out of a possible 492 games. He just couldn't stay on the floor. It wasn't until he was 35 years old in his 07-08 season that he finally regained his health and found a role on the Phoenix Suns. He was a decent role player for them, consistently averaging around 12 points a game, but his days as a superstar player were then just a distant memory. Essentially, Hill had only his first 6 years in the league to display his healthy talent before his progression was cut short and his career was basically ruined due to his ankle problems. To help put that in perspective, here are a few of the greatest players ever and the ramifications on their careers if they had a career-ruining ankle injury after their first 6 seasons. Kobe Bryant would have only 3 championships, no MVPs, and no 81-point game. LeBron James would have 0 championships and only 1 MVP award. And Michael Jordan would have 0 championships and only 1 MVP award. Hopefully this gives you a sense of just how much greatness we potentially lost from Hill. Due to this, he remains one of the greatest what-ifs in all of NBA history.
People always talk about Magic Johnson's passing ability, and they always talk about Larry Bird's passing ability, but it's rarely people really recognize Michael Jordan for the exceptional passer that he is.
Michael Jordan has earned recognition for many of his talents, but until recently, his ability to assist his fellow Bulls has been an overlooked asset. Once considered a solo performer, Jordan has proven that he's one of the game's ultimate team players.
Jordan's so unselfish, he finds the open man.
At this point, this guy doesn't need much of an introduction on my channel. You all know about MJ's accomplishments and pedigree as a basketball player. Now let me ask you a question. If you had to summarize Michael Jordan in one word, what would you choose? I bet some would say winner, competitor, or even champion. And those would all be great answers. But I also think one of the more popular selections would be scorer. After all, Michael Jordan holds an insane amount of scoring records, like the highest scoring average in regular season history and in playoff history. And he easily holds the record for the most scoring titles with a total of 10. Because of this, MJ is sometimes put in a confined box as a historical talent. Oftentimes, he's seen by younger fans as a legend with a particular set of skills, and not necessarily viewed as an all-around talent. In reality, this couldn't be further from the truth. Yes, MJ strongly preferred to lead his team as their primary scoring threat, but on numerous occasions, he displayed his skills as an elite passer and as a masterful floor general. One of the times where his playmaking ability was called upon was towards the end of the 1988-89 season. In a controversial decision, the head coach of the Chicago Bulls, Doug Collins, decided to move Jordan from his standard shooting guard spot to the starting point guard position, in an attempt to spark some extra life into their offense. Basically overnight, MJ suddenly appeared to be a completely different kind of superstar than the one we had become accustomed to. Now MJ's remarkable court vision and sound decision making was completely on display. His offensive IQ was off the charts, and he had fantastic ball control, as his massive hands and secure grip on the basketball allowed him to do things as a play creator that most other players couldn't replicate. It translated to some truly goofy numbers. At one point, MJ had 7 straight games with a triple-double, and he also got 10 triple-doubles in an 11-game stretch. Then there was a 3-game stretch where he had at least 40 points and at least 10 assists each night. He was at the helm of the offense as their point guard for the final 24 games of the regular season, and in those contests, he averaged a monstrous 30.4 points, 9.2 rebounds, 10.7 assists, and 2.5 steals, while hitting just under 50% of his shots. On top of that, he was simultaneously locking down opposing guards on the other end of the basketball court, as he finished first team all-defense. At the conclusion of this season, the Bulls had been eliminated for the second straight year at the hands of the Pistons. And because of that, Chicago decided to let go of their head coach, Doug Collins, and replaced him with Phil Jackson. With Jackson and Tex Winter now in the mix, Jordan then had to play in the triangle offense and relinquished his point guard responsibilities. Due to this, his final 24 games of the 1989 season is now basically seen as this massive what if, as we can only imagine how his career would have played out if he had remained at the point guard position. With that being said, that wouldn't be the last time where Jordan embraced a role as a facilitator. Just 2 years later, Jordan was entering his first NBA Finals of his career, and he was set to square off with the greatest facilitator in the game's history, Magic Johnson. I've talked about this series many times before on this channel, but usually I'm looking at it from the angle of Michael Jordan taking the torch from Magic, making his iconic layup, and hitting 13 straight shots without a miss. But one of the more overlooked aspects of this series was how much of a giver Jordan was on this massive stage. In these games, Magic wasn't the only one looking to make his teammates better, as Jordan showed that he could do it too. In 4 out of those 5 games, Jordan had double-digit assists, including 13 assists in his iconic second game and 13 assists in Game 4. Over the course of the series, he averaged 11.4 assists while still managing to get 31.2 points on 56% shooting from the field. This made Michael Jordan the first player in NBA history to simultaneously average at least 30 points and at least 10 assists in a finals series. The only player to do it since then is LeBron James. That's the craziest part about all of this, is that even in the moments where Jordan chose to be an elite facilitator, like at the end of the 1989 season and in the 1991 finals, he still managed to average his 30 points per night. If MJ was less aggressive as a scorer and was content with 20 to 22 points per game, could he have averaged 15 assists a night? It might sound crazy, but so does getting 11 assists a night while being the league's leading scorer. So maybe it's more plausible than it initially sounds. Consider this. For a career, Michael Jordan has the 6th highest assist per game average by a shooting guard in NBA history. But 4 of the players ahead of him spent entire seasons at the point guard position. So among 2 guards who never spent an entire season at point, Jordan has the 2nd highest assist per game average of all time. Even in this reality, with no what ifs being considered, MJ is quite clearly one of the greatest passers that this game has ever seen. But if he chose to embrace that floor general role throughout his career, then he almost certainly would have been seen as the greatest point guard of all time by a significant margin.
He would be unbelievable in today's game because he could switch 1 to 5. And so he could, guy come off the pick and you got the 1, oh, he's moving his feet. And if you throw the lob, he's going back to still try to contest the lob. I've never seen a player that could double in the pick and roll and get back to his man on the roll and still block the shot. He was the most unique athlete in terms of instinct. Yeah. Like, he just knew when to leave. He knew when to stay. He knew when to come. I know you're a great defensive player, and that's why I kind of watch certain things that you do on the pick and roll. And it's okay, imagine if you were 6'10", and your athleticism was Blake Griffin. That was Hakeem. Now, how many people were scoring you? How many? That's him.
Jesus.
And then, all the other teams I played for, the one common denominator was great big men. Think about Shaq, Tim Duncan. Mm-hmm. And if you say right now, name the top 5 big men, I played with 3 of them.
Who's who? You played with 3 of them?
Well, Dream's number 1 by far.
He was drafted before Michael Jordan. And no one blinks. No one uttered an insulting syllable towards the Houston Rockets for grabbing Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon. No one has ever said a word.
Olajuwon, he was in the top 10 in 5 categories: steals, rebounds, block shots, scoring, and shooting percentage. To have a big guy of his size to be in the top 10 in steals.
Hakeem the Dream Olajuwon has been in the news a lot lately, mainly for the fact that he helped create the monster that is Victor Wembanyama, who is currently dominating the modern NBA with his massive leap forward this past offseason. But what's important to keep in mind is that long before Hakeem was creating monsters, he was the monster. If you're unfamiliar with Olajuwon's game, then you need to know that he was one of the most complete centers in the history of the league. For goodness sake, the man was drafted before Michael Jordan, and absolutely nobody in Houston regrets it. He likely had the greatest footwork of any player to ever play this game. He's in the argument for the greatest defender of all time. He's one of only 3 players to win MVP and DPOY in the same season. He's the all-time leader in blocked shots. He has the highest career steals per game average of any center in league history. He was an elite rebounder, a marvelous mid-range shooter, and he's ranked 16th on the NBA's all-time scoring list. He's a 2-time champion, a 2-time Finals MVP, and is the only player in NBA history to win back-to-back championships without having a single supporting all-star on either of those teams. The list of impressive all-around accolades goes on, but one of the accomplishments that perfectly sums up his game is the fact that Hakeem is one of only 4 players in NBA history to achieve the illustrious quadruple-double. It happened on March 29th, 1990, in a blowout victory over the Milwaukee Bucks. On the night, Hakeem had 18 points, 16 rebounds, 10 assists, and 11 blocks. Now that's already insane, but what's truly crazy is how Olajuwon nearly had a second quadruple-double just 3 weeks earlier. On March 3rd, 1990, in a blowout victory over the Warriors, Hakeem had 29 points, 18 rebounds, 9 assists, 5 steals, and 11 blocks on 52% shooting from the field. This wasn't just a couple of random nights where Hakeem had otherworldly performances, but rather they were a couple of highlights from one of the most locked-in months that a superstar player has ever experienced. Between those 2 quadruple-double type performances, which was only a 3-week spread, Hakeem had 5 games where he had at least 8 blocked shots, 2 games with at least 20 rebounds, and 5 games with at least 4 steals. Between February 15th and March 29th of the 1990 season, Hakeem had a stretch that even his prodigy, Victor Wembanyama, would have a hard time achieving. Over that 22-game stretch, he averaged an utterly insane 25.7 points, 15.6 rebounds, 3.1 assists, 2.7 steals, and 6 blocks on 47.5% shooting. Every bit of that production was desperately needed for his squad, because at the beginning of that stretch, the Rockets were only the 10th seed in the Western Conference. But by the end of that stretch, where he got his quadruple-double performance, they had moved up to the 8th seed, which is ultimately the spot where they finished their regular season, as he successfully dragged his Rockets into the playoffs. At the end of the day, this was one of the greatest carry jobs in league history. But at the same time, this isn't even the most famous carry job of his legendary career, as he would have that several years into the future, as he led his team to multiple championships as the lone all-star. Now listen, I understand getting hyped at some of the incredible stat lines that we're seeing in this modern NBA. Trust me, I get hyped about them too. But sometimes, I think we're too quick to act like they're the sort of performances that we've never seen before, when in reality, the mentors of those stars did things just like that before these modern guys had even been born.
It's one of the reasons that LeBron is so great. I refuse to get into the GOAT debate. I don't care. They didn't play against each other. I do not care. What makes him great, well, a bunch of things, but what has made him great is the fact that he's done it now for 21 years at the highest level. I think it's fair to just say there are different tiers of greatness. By the way, a lot of times we're comparing eras, we're comparing different rules, we're comparing the fact that, look, like I'll say this with Michael Jordan, and I don't mean this to be controversial, but like everybody talks about all these, the context of this era. Michael Jordan, the Dallas Mavericks were added as the 23rd team in 1981. Jordan was drafted. During his heyday, 6 teams were added to the NBA. There were 90 players added to the NBA. Does that not water down? I'm not talking playoffs, by the way. No chance we're talking playoffs. Does that not water down the regular season to a degree? You lived it, right? You played against some of those teams. You played against the Bobcats. If we add 2 teams in 2 or 3 years, we get a Vegas franchise or a Seattle franchise, you're not telling me that the league for a little bit is going to be a little watered down?
Maybe, a little bit.
So as you just saw, JJ Redick is back at it again, dropping some of those controversial takes that are sure to rile people up, while literally claiming that he's not trying to be controversial. In this one clip, he mentioned that he doesn't care about the GOAT conversation at all, and then he immediately followed it up by taking a shot specifically at Jordan's era. As for myself personally, I no longer get frustrated with JJ's takes about old school eras, because to be completely honest, the shade is kind of expected at this point. After starting a podcast with LeBron James, and after the rumors swirling about the Lakers head coaching spot, it doesn't surprise me in the slightest that JJ is saying things that supports his friend and his fellow podcaster. But the question is, with all of that being said, does the man have a point? Was the 90s actually a watered down era? And is that a legitimate criticism when looking at the GOAT debate? Today, I'll do my best to answer that, as I explain the details of how the expansion worked. Starting things off, let's look at the basics of how the league expanded. At the end of the 1987 to 1988 NBA season, there were 23 teams in the league. With the popularity of the game reaching record heights, the league office desired to expand their product and bring more NBA teams to more cities, which would naturally and dramatically increase revenue over time. Between the 88 to 89 season and the 95 to 96 season, the league added 6 more teams, which increased the total number of franchises to 29. Those teams were the Miami Heat and the Charlotte Hornets in 1988, the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Orlando Magic in 1989, and the Toronto Raptors and the Vancouver Grizzlies in 1995. Now here's the thing, most people don't even understand how these teams were formulated. Contrary to popular belief, they weren't just picking up random water boys and semi-athletic fans out of the stands. But first and foremost, the expansion teams were able to pick players from the other 23 teams in the league. But obviously, they couldn't just pick any players that they wanted. Otherwise, an expansion team would become an overpowered super team in their first season. There were specific rules in place for the expansion draft, and the first one is that each pre-existing team in the league could protect up to 8 players on their roster, but after that, everyone else was up for grabs. The second major rule was that each team in the league would only give up 1 player in order to form the 2 expansion teams. Obviously, this wouldn't leave many immediate all-stars for the expansion teams to select, but they were able to get some quality pieces, like the famous enforcer Rick Mahorn, the prolific scorer Reggie Theus, and the NBA's record holder for the most assists in a single game, Scott Skiles. Now you can act like the Bulls dynasty always benefited from these expansions, but the truth is they were actually hurt by it in some instances. For example, BJ Armstrong was one of the best 3-point shooters in the entire league, and had just been an NBA All-Star the year prior. But because of the expansion draft in 1995, he was taken from the Bulls with the first overall pick, severely weakening the strength of Chicago's roster. So ultimately, an important detail to remember is that the expansion teams were made up of quality NBA players, and it was the responsibility of the other 23 teams, Bulls included, to then fill their roster spot, with either a player from the draft or through free agency. So now that we understand how the expansion teams were created, and that it wasn't just a collection of scrubs like JJ Redick makes it seem, it's time for me to make my next major point. Expansion teams typically don't stay awful for very long. The NBA is constructed in such a way where it's a league that tries to naturally maintain a competitive balance. Although expansion teams don't have many all-star level players in their first season, they do start accumulating top draft lottery picks rather quickly, thanks to their low seeding. And it's also worth mentioning that they usually have plenty of cap space to make moves in the off-season. Sure, the Charlotte Hornets began playing in the 88 to 89 season, But by the 92-93 season, they had a stacked roster, with stars like Alonzo Mourning, Larry Johnson, and Kendall Gill, and made it all the way to the Eastern Conference semifinals. The Miami Heat also began playing in the 88-89 season, but they were a playoff team by the 91-92 season, and by the 96-97 season, they were legitimate title contenders, who were stacked with all-stars, won 61 games, and made it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals. Then you had the Orlando Magic and the Minnesota Timberwolves, who began playing in the 89-90 season. Yes, the Wolves were bad, and stayed bad for a long time. But at this point, I think we can tell that this was mostly because of bad management, and not necessarily because they were an expansion team. The Orlando Magic were able to get guys like Shaquille O'Neal and Penny Hardaway because of their low seeding, and by 1994, they were legitimate title contenders. They were the only team to eliminate Jordan's Bulls after they begun winning championships, and the Magic even went on to the NBA Finals in 1995. So what I just explained is that 3 out of those first 4 expansion teams were not only decent, but were extremely competitive within a few years. Before the Bulls even started their second three-peat, 3 out of those 4 teams were legitimate obstacles for Chicago. Now for the last 2 expansion teams, you have the Toronto Raptors and the Vancouver Grizzlies, who began playing basketball in the 95-96 season. And yes, those 2 teams did stay awful throughout the entirety of the Bulls' second three-peat. So here's what you need to consider. In the 95-96 season, where the Bulls famously finished with a 72-10 record, the Grizzlies were in the West and the Raptors were in the East. In that record-breaking regular season, the Bulls had a 2-0 record against the Grizzlies and a 3-1 record against the Raptors. Now, if those expansion teams didn't exist, and those 5 victories were against regular NBA teams instead, then yeah, it's at least possible that the Bulls win less games, and maybe they finish with 69 or 70 wins instead of 72. But I mean, in order for that to happen, you have to assume that the Bulls would have had a 3-3 record against the average NBA team. And considering the fact that they went 67-9 against the rest of the league that season, I would say that that's a pretty big assumption. I think you guys are starting to see my point. The impact that the expansion era had on the Bulls dynasty is negligible when you understand the full context. If you were to go back in time in the summer of 1995 and you were to ask the Bulls management, would they rather keep their sharpshooter BJ Armstrong, or would they rather not have the Toronto Raptors standing in their path in the Eastern Conference? I think their answer would be rather obvious. Of course, they would rather keep their quality player. Now imagine, it's 1998, Michael Jordan just epically defeated the Utah Jazz with a 45-point performance in Game 6 of the NBA Finals to win his 6th championship and 6th Finals MVP. And in an interview, you get to tell MJ to his face that he's not the greatest player of all time because the Toronto Raptors and the Vancouver Grizzlies exist. Yeah. Someone needs to tell JJ Redick that that's as ridiculous as it sounds. So over the years on my channel, I've changed my mind several times on who I believe was the most underrated player in NBA history. And honestly, I think I have a legitimate reason to change it once again. Now when I say quote underrated, I mean it in a literal sense. I'm not talking about guys who are underappreciated or underrecognized, but I'm talking about a guy who is ranked way lower by the general audience than I believe he should be. The player I'm talking about is the 7-foot 1-inch center David Robinson, also known as the Admiral. This legend had a late start to his NBA career due to him finishing his time in the Navy. He didn't end up playing his first game in the NBA until he was at the age of 24. Now we all agree that he was a good player and a perennial all-star. But when I last ranked my 30 greatest players of all time, I had Robinson at 22, which was ahead of guys like Karl Malone, Kevin Garnett, Giannis, and Nikola Jokic. I think this specific ranking created more backlash than any other ranking on the list. People simply don't believe that Robinson is as good as I think he was. I believe there's several reasons for this. For one, Robinson is generally seen by modern fans as a playoff choker. He was famously bested by Hakeem Olajuwon in the 1995 Western Conference Finals, and that lasting impression has done a lot to hinder his legacy. The other thing is that David Robinson was never the best player on either of his championship teams. Sure, he won it in 1999 and 2003, but those were mostly as complementary roles to the Finals MVP Tim Duncan. Lastly, a lot of younger fans believe that when Tim Duncan was drafted in 1997, he saved the Admiral and the Spurs from the bottom-feeding ranks of the league, which honestly couldn't be further from the truth. Let's actually start with this narrative. When Duncan was drafted by San Antonio, the Spurs had the first overall pick, since they had just finished the previous season with an ugly 20-62 record. So immediately, at face value, it seems that Duncan saved an embarrassing franchise. But that's completely lacking context. In the 1996 preseason, Robinson severely hurt his back, and due to this, he missed his first 18 games of the regular season, before eventually returning to action on December 10, 1997. Then Robinson only played 6 regular season games before he broke his foot, resulting in a season being shut down early. What you need to understand is that Robinson's absence was the reason the Spurs finished with only a 20-62 record. For goodness sake, they had just won 59 games in the previous season with a healthy Robinson, and many San Antonio fans had championship hopes for the 96-97 season, before it all went crashing down with the Admiral's injuries. Before Duncan showed up, there was basically never a time where Robinson's Spurs weren't seen as legitimate contenders in the Western Conference, as the Robinson-led Spurs were averaging a whopping 55 wins a season over their 7-year stretch before the injuries. This wasn't some super team either, as the Spurs' next best player was the small forward Sean Elliott, who was a quality player, but I would also describe him as a borderline all-star at best. The truth is, Duncan wasn't just joining some rebuilding lottery team, but he was joining a perennial Western Conference contender, thanks first and foremost to the dominant play of David Robinson. Obviously, David wasn't totally the same player when he returned from the injury, since he was now in his mid-30s while recovering from an injury that often destroys the careers of many big men. Regardless, in his first season back in 1998, he averaged nearly 22 points, 11 rebounds, and 2.6 blocks, while hitting 51% of his shots. He actually finished 7th overall in the MVP race, and 3rd overall in the Defensive Player of the Year voting. Again, that was his impact in his declining phase. And his prime was something else entirely. At different points in his career, Robinson led the NBA in scoring, in rebounding, and he led the NBA in blocked shots. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is the only other player in NBA history who has led the league in points per game, rebounds per game, and blocks per game. Technically, Wilt Chamberlain should probably be in that list as well, if blocked shots had been tracked in his era. But still, the fact that Robinson did something that only Kareem and Wilt have ever done should really tell you just how special he was. Robinson's defense is criminally slept on, as he was simply one of the greatest rim protectors of all time. He made 8 all-defense teams in his career, which is the 3rd most among primary centers. Also consider the fact that he earned 8 selections while competing against the likes of Hakeem Olajuwon, Patrick Ewing, Shaquille O'Neal, Dikembe Mutombo, and Alonzo Mourning. He was the NBA's Defensive Player of the Year in 1992, and he averaged an absurd 2.3 steals, which was the 5th most in the entire league, and a whopping 4.5 blocks, which was the 7th highest single-season average of all time. Add in his 1995 MVP and his 2 championship rings, and yeah, this guy has a pretty insane resume that isn't usually ranked high enough. He wasn't just some big towering player who took advantage of players smaller than him, but Robinson was an athletic freak who was way ahead of his time, He was one of the strongest, if not the strongest player in the entire league. He was fast, he was quick, he was lethal in transition, and he had an incredibly soft touch on his jump shot that was very dangerous as far as 18 feet out. Now, was he the greatest playoff performer? No, but a lot of guys are ranked high on the all-time list while having plenty of postseason struggles. I'm not saying that Robinson should be ahead of centers like Shaquille O'Neal or Hakeem Olajuwon, but to act like it's utterly ludicrous to have him in the top 25 is simply a misunderstanding of his tremendous impact, both statistically and in terms of winning games. So fairly recently in the NBA, Chris Paul surpassed Jason Kidd on the NBA's all-time assists list, moving into the second spot all-time. This is an impressive feat, and it's worth appreciating the greatness of Chris Paul, and reflecting on just how long he's been making a significant impact on the league. Naturally, after Paul reached this milestone, many younger basketball fans began wondering if he had a shot at reaching the #1 spot, and that's when they realized that it would never happen, as John Stockton has a career total of 15,806 assists. So with this information being out there in the world, what do you think happened? Do you think younger fans took a moment to appreciate the greatness of John Stockton and respect the fact that he has one of the most unbreakable records in NBA history? Of course not. In typical form for the disrespectful modern fans, they immediately began taking a dump on him as a player, trashing his legacy, ridiculing his competition, and claiming that Chris Paul is the actual all-time assist leader. Because, quote, Stockton's stats are fake. Just to be clear, this is nothing new for John Stockton, as he's been taking heat from various YouTubers, fans, and modern analysts for nearly a decade at this point. When I first entered the YouTube sphere as a creator, the narrative at the time was that he didn't have a left hand. Although it's true that Stockton used predominantly his right hand, it doesn't take much in-depth searching on YouTube for an honest person to realize that Stockton did in fact have a left hand. The next predominant narrative was that John Stockton was the beneficiary of biased statisticians, as many YouTubers and analysts have claimed that Stockton's assist numbers were artificially inflated by Utah statisticians, which is why his numbers ended up being so outlandish. And then, the next predominant narrative was that he wasn't all that special of a point guard because he played with Karl Malone, who was one of the major reasons why those assist numbers got so high. Those three negative narratives, the left hand, the fake stats, and the Karl Malone handicap, are the main things I'm dissecting in this video. So sit back and enjoy as we uncover the truth behind the legacy of John Stockton. First off, the left hand. To my understanding, this entire narrative started when a YouTuber by the name of the NBA Storyteller made this video. And in short, his conclusion was basically that John Stockton didn't have a left hand. Allegedly, he couldn't dribble with it, pass with it, drive with it, or even finish with it. At the very least, I respect observant individuals who are able to spot certain trends that others may miss, but also a person who's bold enough to make their claim even if they know they're going to take heat for it in return. That's what the NBA Storyteller did with this video, so I gotta give him credit for that, because the footage tells us that Stockton leaned heavily upon his dominant right hand. The thing is, I think this is a product of the era he played in. Back when Stockton was a young player, defensive players can hand check the ball handler, as they essentially steered the offensive player in the direction that they wanted him to go. Also consider how difficult it is to do stuff like crossover dribbles and various moves with both hands when the defensive player is allowed to be up in your jersey with his hand on you. Naturally, this forces the offensive ball handler to be more protective with the basketball, meaning he would often be backing down a player from the three-point line, and the ball is in his dominant hand as a way to be more secure with the rock. This wasn't just something that Stockton did, but it was a regular part of Magic Johnson's game as well. Then there's extensive footage online of Stockton actually doing work with his left hand. So at the very least, he could use it, but he just didn't use it as often. And here's my last and most significant point about Stockton's left hand, which is essentially, so what if he doesn't have a left hand? So you're trying to tell me that he dominated the game of basketball and became the all-time leader in assists with only one hand? And somehow that makes him less impressive? If anything, that just makes me more mesmerized by the skill of his right hand. Listen, currently the NBA's reigning finals MVP is a guy who definitely doesn't have a left hand in his game. At one point, Jaylen Brown was the highest paid player in NBA history, all while NBA fans and NBA scouts knew full well that he was incapable of driving left, dribbling left, and finishing left with any bit of consistency. For goodness sake, look at how bad he is in this layup drill. Are we positive that John Stockton would have been any worse than this? It's also weird when people act like a player having one single weakness suddenly destroys his entire legacy and credibility. Even the greatest players of all time had weaknesses in their game. For example, Wilt Chamberlain, Shaquille O'Neal, and LeBron James are all liabilities from the free throw line. Guys like Magic Johnson, Steph Curry, and Dirk Nowitzki are subpar defensive players at best. Michael Jordan was a terrible three-point shooter in the first 4 seasons of his career. I could go on, but the point is that if these weaknesses of these great players don't fully invalidate their legacies, then why should that be the case for John Stockton? Let's get into the next one, the alleged fake stats. The narrative is that Stockton got homebrewed stats for his games in Utah because the biased Jazz statisticians wanted to make their guy look better. Tom Haberstroh covered some of this when he made his famous critical piece about Michael Jordan's 1988 season. Is there some truth to these home-cooked stats? Possibly, and there's been some examples surfacing online that look pretty damning for Stockton. The thing is, basketball is an imperfect sport, recorded by imperfect people. Not only do I expect there to be mistakes, but I fully expect there to be instances where players are artificially elevated by their supporters. When I did my own video covering Michael Jordan's 1988 season, I found a lot of evidence that specifically some of his steals numbers might have been juiced in some instances. And guess what, guys? I've been doing research for my video about LeBron's assists, which will be dropping next month. And I could promise you in advance that there's some fishiness to his numbers as well. I don't care who the star player is. If you look hard enough, you're always going to be able to find instances where the numbers were inaccurate in their favor. So that's the first major part of my point, but the next one is maybe even more important. Let's really delve into these quote home-cooked stats. First off, what you need to know is that there is a different statistician for home and away games. For example, when the Lakers play in Los Angeles, their stats will be tracked by their own statistician. But when they travel to Utah, their stats will be tracked by the Jazz statistician. And this is why people make the accusations that certain players benefited from home-brewed stats. So let me give you some examples. For LeBron James's career, he averages 7.6 assists per game at home and 7.2 assists per game on the road. So immediately, some of you might be looking at this and assume that there's some shenanigans going on. But the reality is, general NBA players always play better at home. They have the advantage of the home crowd. They're sleeping in their own bed, they're not jet lagged from all the traveling, and they're present with their families in their routines. For a variety of reasons, it only makes sense that the numbers consistently look better at home. So let's look at some other great facilitators. In Magic Johnson's career, he averaged 12.2 assists at home and 11.6 on the road. Chris Paul has averaged 9.6 assists at home and 9 assists on the road. And then John Stockton averaged 10.9 assists at home and 10.1 on the road. So immediately, the one thing that stands out is that Stockton has the largest discrepancy between home stats and road stats. So maybe there actually is something behind these allegations. But keep in mind that the difference between his gap and Chris Paul's gap is 0.2 assists per game. Not really something that's shaking up the all-time rankings by any significant extent. So let's just assume that we can only go by Stockton's numbers in his away games. If you adjusted his home game averages to be the same as his road numbers, Stockton still would have finished with around 15,190 assists, meaning that even without the home game boost, he would still have a lead over Chris Paul greater than 3,000 assists. It would still be virtually impossible for CP3 to be even close to catching Stockton before he retires. So at the end of the day, this narrative that Stockton is only the leader because of the home-cooked stats is not only stupid, but it's completely asinine to even suggest it. Lastly is the criticism that he's only the NBA's all-time leader because he played alongside of Karl Malone. Well, let me start things off by saying that I don't think anyone is ruling out the fact that Malone obviously boosted Stockton's assist numbers. I mean, for goodness sake, the mailman was one of the greatest power forwards in NBA history. He was a 2-time league MVP, and he's the game's 3rd leading scorer on the all-time list. But to be fair, who is Kobe without Shaq? Who is LeBron without Wade? Who is Magic without Kareem? And who is Michael Jordan without Scottie Pippen? Every all-time great benefited from some significant help. So to pick and choose which ones to disqualify is completely unfair unless you do it to the rest of the field as well. In his career, John Stockton and Karl Malone played a total of 19 seasons together. And in that time, there was a total of 10 regular season games where Stockton played without Malone. This was back in the day where NBA superstars played all 82 games with extreme consistency. Regardless of the fact that most of these 10 regular season games were past Stockton's prime, he still managed to average 9.6 assists per game without Karl Malone. This means that if we prorated Stockton's assists without Malone to the rest of his career, he would still have about 14,438 assists, meaning that he would have a lead of 2,300 assists over Chris Paul, even without his greatest offensive weapon. So basically, the dumb narratives that are constantly regurgitated about Stockton are just that, extremely dumb false narratives. If you ask me who Stockton was, he was simply one of the top 2 greatest passers in the history of the game. He wasn't an explosive scorer by any means, but he was very efficient in his contributions, and was always a threat from 3-point range. He was an all-time great defensive player, and I'm just now mentioning that he's the game's all-time leader in steals as well, and by a country mile. He wasn't a flashy player by any means. He was smooth and methodical. He was extremely smart and safe with the basketball, as he had an incredible assist-to-turnover ratio. He was a master of angles, anticipation, and communication. He was nowhere close to being considered as an athletic freak. But like other greats in the modern NBA, like Nikola Jokic, Luka Doncic, and Chris Paul, John Stockton didn't need to be, as he was fundamentally sound, skilled, and just understood the game better than 99% of the guys within the league. Sure, he made it to the NBA Finals twice and never won a single championship, but that's nobody's fault other than Michael Jordan. Literally, nobody's fault other than Michael Jeffrey Jordan, who kept a lot of all-time greats from winning championships. Stockton led his Jazz to beat a Rockets 3-headed monster of Olajuwon, Barkley, and Drexler. And before you say it was because they were old, newsflash, the Bulls and Jazz were basically just as old. Stockton also helped lead his Jazz to defeat the Lakers super team in 1998, who had 4 NBA All-Stars like Shaq, Kobe, Eddie Jones, and Nick Van Exel. This was a Lakers team that many people expected to represent the West in the 1998 NBA Finals, and even the Lakers themselves made some of those claims throughout that season. And Stockton was the floor general for the team that beat that squad. You can say that Stockton didn't have a left hand, that he had weak competition, and he had a superstar forward that made him look better than he actually was. You're free to have whatever opinion you want, but you know who I'm listening to the opinion of? The guy who's arguably the greatest defensive point guard in the history of the game, Gary Payton. This is a guy who competed with Magic Johnson, guarded Michael Jordan in the NBA Finals, guarded Kobe Bryant in the NBA playoffs, and he's also a guy whose career overlapped with Dwayne Wade and LeBron James. So he's a defensive legend who's been a part of all kinds of amazing eras. And you know who he says is the most difficult player he's ever had to guard? That's right, John freaking Stockton. So based on all that, if he indeed doesn't have a left hand after all, well then I guess his right hand might just be the greatest right hand in the history of basketball. Earvin Magic Johnson, one of the greatest players in NBA history, and many people still believe he's the greatest point guard of all time. Magic obviously had a historic beginning to his career, but what I believe isn't talked about enough is the iconic farewell to his NBA career, which was a roller coaster of emotions for the basketball community, finishing off with a satisfying ending that I personally will never forget. In order to understand the impact of Magic's beautiful moment, we first have to understand his journey to get there. Let's go all the way back to early June of 1991. At this time, Magic Johnson is just 31 years old. He's the runner-up for the league MVP, and he was the MVP in the previous season. He's coming off of a regular season where he averaged nearly 20 points and 12.5 assists, and he's about to make his 9th NBA Finals appearance as a 5-time NBA champion. To summarize it all, Johnson had just entered his early 30s and appeared to be every bit as good as he ever was before. Even without the recently retired Kareem Abdul-Jabbar as a teammate, Johnson was still able to lead his Lakers to the NBA Finals yet again. He had already built a resume worthy of being called the greatest point guard ever, and he seemingly still had a second half of his career ahead of him. When the 1991 Finals began, Magic was going toe-to-toe with the prime Michael Jordan. And although Michael ended up being the Finals MVP, Magic displayed a remarkable effort of his own. Many people believe that the Lakers never really had a true opportunity in this series, since Magic's two best scoring options, James Worthy and Byron Scott, both dealt with injuries throughout and missed a significant amount of time. Even without his two best weapons in the elimination game, Magic still put up 16 points, 20 assists, and 11 rebounds. What he didn't realize, and what none of the audience had realized either, is that this would be his last NBA Finals game of his entire career. Because a few months later, on November 7th, 1991, Magic held one of the most shocking press conferences in the history of sports. It was at this moment that the world became aware that the face of the Showtime Lakers was now HIV positive. At the time, little was known about the disease, so the assumption from almost everyone was that in a matter of months, he would lose a tremendous amount of weight and then pass away. Along with the horrific news of Magic's health, he also made it aware to the world that he was retiring from the Lakers, effective immediately. Imagine your favorite basketball player being at the peak of his abilities, and in a matter of seconds, he goes from one of the best players in the game to a retired player who could pass at any moment. Needless to say, this was a jarring pill to swallow for basketball fans, as seemingly everyone had their hearts broken for Magic on that day. Over the next several months and years, people would begin to learn a lot about living with HIV and the various details, like how it's transmitted and who's at risk. But many were still scared about the idea of being in contact with someone who had it. Then, in February of 1992, things got really interesting for Johnson and the basketball world. The NBA All-Star Game is an exhibition event where the fans vote and determine who will play for each conference. Despite the fact that Magic had retired from basketball, the fans still voted him in to be the starting point guard of the Western All-Stars. After receiving approval from doctors and from the league for Magic to play, the hype train was officially underway. The thing is, not everyone was so enthusiastic. Many players were concerned about their own well-being. Even Magic's former teammates, like Byron Scott and AC Green, said that he shouldn't participate. The player who was the most vocal about his displeasure with Magic competing was the Western Conference All-Star Karl Malone, who had this to say before the game was played.
If I get in a collision with a guy, it don't have to be Magic. It can be Joe Smoke. But the fact of the matter is, if you got the AIDS virus, it'll be hard for me to play as hard as I'm capable of playing.
Although there was plenty of drama heading into that night, there was also plenty of teammates and competitors who encouraged Magic to participate. Just as a spectator, you could tell that there was this awkward, unspoken tension in the air. But you could also sense the excitement and the magnitude of the moment, as the Orlando crowd gave Johnson a standing ovation during player introductions. Everyone understood that the ideal outcome was the West winning and Magic securing the All-Star Game MVP. But regardless of how badly the crowd wanted that, he still had to go out there and perform well. Seeing that Magic hadn't played a game in nearly a year, and seeing how he was now dealing with a life-altering disease, many people were concerned that he wouldn't have the conditioning or stamina to hang with the best players in the world. But all of those concerns were quickly put to rest soon after tip-off commenced. Although he built a legacy for himself as mainly a distributor, Magic was looking to score early on, and he did so with tremendous efficiency. Throughout the night, the West played with more energy and effort, and a 10-point lead quickly became a 20-point lead, and then a 20-point lead suddenly became a 30-point lead. The outcome was never really in question, but the MVP of the game appeared to be up for grabs, and the Western Conference's Clyde Drexler appeared to be the favorite heading into the second half with a monstrous stat line. After looking to score for a while, Magic finally got his first assist of the game with just under 9 minutes left in the third quarter. And then he got on a roll with his flashy Showtime passes that we were accustomed to. With less than 3 minutes left in the game, Magic suddenly hit the switch and displayed one of the most beautiful finishes in All-Star Game history. Just so you can sense the gravity and energy of this inspiring moment, I'll let you guys watch the final sequences of this game with no voiceover. And please, pay attention to how Magic was at the center of it all.
135-106. With 2:46 to go, no doubt about this one.
There it is. There's the three.
Magic got his three.
Waiting for that moment to shoot the three.
Who has all the NBA three-point marks, most attempts, most made. Johnson, 2 in a row for Magic. He's going for the MVP. The Atlanta Hawk has 8. Chris Mullin for 3. It's out shooting the East in every quarter. And will be around the 60% mark, and another great pass. And Marley has his first points. Magic raises his. Well, this is a mismatch, and Magic would be the first to admit it. Michael Kind.
And that's 2, Magic said. Bring the next one on.
6, 5. Three-pointer. Yes! Oh, my! Ladies and gentlemen, you just can't orchestrate it better than that.
When Magic hit that final falling away three-pointer, there was still 15 seconds left on the clock. Yet no one on the court seemed to even care, as they all surrounded and congratulated the Lakers legend. The game ended on the spot. It was a perfectly fitting and poetic way for the game to end, with a Magic Johnson jumper. Any question of who was the game's MVP now had an obvious answer, as Magic finished the game with 25 points, 9 assists, 5 rebounds, and 2 steals on 75% shooting. What started as a somewhat dramatic and awkward event ended up as one of the most uniting and inspiring conclusions in the history of sports. At the time, everyone believed that this was the last NBA game that he would ever participate in. And up until Kobe's farewell game in 2016, this exhibition contest stood alone as the most incredible farewell game by a Los Angeles Laker. Amazingly, over 3 decades later, Magic is still going, with the same smile and with the same enthusiasm that he was famous for. Let me take you back in time. It's October 6th, 1993, and the Chicago Bulls are currently the defending NBA champions, just recently winning their 3rd straight title, making themselves the first team to three-peat since Bill Russell's Celtics in the 1980s. Michael Jordan seemed as if he was at the height of his powers, coming off of an NBA Finals series where he just averaged 41 points per game. He was the most famous sports athlete in the entire world. But unfortunately, after the tragic passing of his father, James Jordan, just a few months earlier, Michael Jordan shook the basketball world by abruptly announcing his retirement, which was effective immediately. Obviously, this was overwhelmingly stunning news to the media, to the league office, and to basketball fans around the world. But after the dust settled, one of the biggest questions that remained was how this would affect the Chicago Bulls' playoff chances moving forward. The Bulls' 28-year-old superstar, Scottie Pippen, was now being thrust into a position that he had never been in before in his basketball career, and that was the role of a leader and as the best player on a professional team. As unfair as the burden of responsibility was, it was now Scottie Pippen's job to fill the shoes that were left empty by the legendary Michael Jordan. But he would be doing it with some extra help. In that offseason, the Bulls made several major acquisitions. One of those was the sharpshooting guard Steve Kerr, and the other was the versatile 6'10" small forward Tony Kukoc. The Bulls were coming off of a year where they had finished the regular season with a 57-25 record under the leadership of Michael Jordan. With MJ now out of the picture and only several new role players to replace him, the Bulls seemed to be a wild card heading into the 1993-94 regular season. Adjusting to a Jordan-less offense would be no easy task for Chicago, and because of this, the regular season got off to quite the rough start. By late November, it was appearing as if it was going to be a disastrous lottery season, as the Bulls were sitting 3 games below 500 in the midst of losing 6 out of their last 7 games. But it was right at this point that things finally started to click for Chicago, and first and foremost, finding his groove was the team's new leader, Scottie Pippen. Although he didn't become a league-leading scorer like some expected after the departure of Jordan, he did assert himself as a more well-rounded team leader, as he did a little bit of everything for Chicago. Over the course of the season, Scottie led his team in points, assists, and steals, while being second in rebounds and blocked shots. With Pippen operating as the point forward in Phil Jackson's triangle offense, the Bulls started executing beautifully on a nightly basis, quickly establishing themselves as a contender in the Eastern Conference. At the end of the regular season, they had a 55-27 record, which was good enough for the 3rd seed in a strong Eastern Conference. Scottie Pippen finished that season 3rd overall in the league MVP race, and at this point, many fans in the Windy City were starting to imagine a scenario that they once thought was impossible. The Bulls might just win their 4th straight championship even without Michael Jordan on the roster. As early May was approaching, Michael Jordan was figuring out his place on the baseball diamond, while his former team, the Chicago Bulls, were preparing for their postseason run. Their first round matchup was against the 6th-seeded Cleveland Cavaliers. This was a Cavs team that they had met in the playoffs in the previous 2 seasons, and the Bulls won on both occasions. But with a talented star point guard at the helm for the Cavaliers by the name of Mark Price, they thought that this might finally be their opportunity to eliminate the Chicago Bulls out of the playoffs. But they couldn't have been more wrong. Scottie Pippen had a monster series, averaging 25 points, 10 rebounds, 4 assists, and 3 steals. And as a result, Chicago swept the Cavs in just 3 games. For years, it was Michael Jordan who was known as the Cavalier Killer, as he was torching Cleveland on both ends of the court and hitting game winners time and time again. But now, the Bulls had just convincingly swept the Cavs without MJ. It goes without saying, the team's confidence was now at an all-time high. But waiting before them in the Eastern Conference semifinals was their greatest test yet. It was their rivals, the physically punishing New York Knicks. In the 2 years prior with MJ, the Bulls had had long playoff battles with the Knicks that ended in 6 and 7 games. Historically, they had always been one of the toughest teams for Chicago to get through. So they believed if they were able to win this series, they would absolutely have what it takes to win the championship. What proceeded was an absolute dogfight. As expected, the series opened up being extremely physical and defensively minded. and after the first 2 games in New York, the Knicks had a 2-0 series lead. There was several famous, iconic plays that occurred in this series, and the first came in Game 3. To put it simply, this contest was absolutely wild, as a crazy brawl broke out that was started between the Knicks' Derek Harper and the Bulls' JoJo English. But despite the altercation clearing the benches and spilling over into the first row of the fans, this was still only an appetizer for the drama that was ahead. With less than 10 seconds left in the game, the Bulls had the ball and were up by 2 points, with the shot clock winding down. Entrusted to take this shot was the Chicago leading star, Scottie Pippen. But with a somewhat limited bag offensively, he was unable to create a good look and didn't get off a shot, as the shot clock expired with the ball in his hands. On the other end of the court, Patrick Ewing hit a running hook shot to tie the game at 102. Now the ball was going back to Chicago with 1.8 seconds left on the clock. A frustrated Scottie was looking for an opportunity to redeem himself with another attempt at a game-icing basket. The thing is, the Bulls head coach Phil Jackson had something else in mind. He decided to set up a play where the inbounds pass would go to Tony Kukoc, who had made several game winners throughout the regular season. Scottie was irate at Phil's decision, and in a protest, he refused to go back into the game altogether. Regardless, Kukoc went on to take the inbounds pass and swished the game-winning jumper, proving the fact that Jackson did know what he was doing. Despite the victory, the post-game locker room for the Bulls was described as incredibly tense and very somber. The Bulls center, Bill Cartwright, gave an emotional speech where he called out Scottie for quitting on the team. Now here's the thing. When you see this in the documentaries, and when you see the mainstream media break down this series, usually they make it seem like the series ended then and there, with Scottie's selfishness ultimately being the team's downfall. But that wasn't in fact the case, as Pippen and Chicago bounced back in a major way. The next game in the series was a must-win for Chicago, and Scottie came through mightily as he dropped 25 points, 8 rebounds, and 6 assists on 10 of 21 shooting. Thanks to this clutch performance, the Bulls won the game and tied up the series at 2 games apiece. The series was now returning to New York for a pivotal 5th game, and what ensued was once again a classic close battle. With just over 7 seconds left in the 4th quarter, the Bulls were up by 1 point, and the Knicks had the ball as they were inbounding the pass with a chance to take the lead. What happened then is simply one of the most controversial foul calls in NBA history, which Chicago fans referred to as their phantom foul. The elite perimeter shooter Hubert Davis catches the ball at the top of the key with a clean look at the basket, but Scottie Pippen closed ground quickly and contested the shot. And NBA referee Hugh Hollins blew the whistle right as the shot was being missed. When you look at the instant replay, you can see that Davis was trying to sell the contact before Pippen had reached him. And even then, it's hard to tell whether or not Pippen actually made any contact with him whatsoever. If the referee doesn't blow that whistle, then the Bulls win the game and take a commanding 3-2 series lead back to Chicago. And in Chicago, for Game 6, the Bulls went on to dominate the Knicks, which included one of the greatest dunks in NBA history, Pippen's disrespectful slam on Patrick Ewing. But unfortunately, that's only a hypothetical, because the ref did blow that whistle, and Hubert Davis went on to hit 2 free throws to win the game for New York. Ultimately, the Knicks went on to win the series in the 7th game at home. But personally, I always felt like that game never should have happened in the first place. Yes, Pippen had that awful, selfish moment in that series, but sadly, he never got that true opportunity to redeem himself with a potential NBA Finals run. Because of this massive, history-shaping call by Hugh Hollins, this season for Scottie Pippen and the Chicago Bulls will remain as one of the biggest what-ifs in franchise history. Michael Jordan is famous for excelling in the NBA playoffs, and has had some truly iconic moments on the game's biggest stage. With that being said, Jordan's best playoff series of his entire career is something that is almost never discussed or considered. If you go back and you watch this series as a whole, you'll see that MJ basically played perfect basketball in nearly every aspect of the game, while carrying his squad in instances where they needed him to. It took place in 1990 in the second round of the Eastern Conference playoffs. This was before the Bulls had won their first championship, and it was the first season of Phil Jackson's head coaching career. The Bulls were the third seed and the 76ers were the second seed. Philadelphia's roster was extremely strong at the top, as they had that season's MVP runner-up Charles Barkley, who put up some truly goofy averages along the course of the regular season. Beside him was the all-star caliber two-guard Hersey Hawkins, who finished 5th overall for the Most Improved Player award while averaging nearly 19 points per game. One of the biggest difference makers that season, though, was the enforcer that they had acquired in the offseason, the 6'10 NBA champion Rick Mahorn. He was coming off of a stint with the bad boy Detroit Pistons, who were the long-lasting rival of Michael Jordan. Mahorn was famous for being one of the biggest punishers to Jordan whenever he got to the painted area. Now, Jordan had to deal with this tremendous obstacle in Philadelphia. On top of that, Mahorn had made the NBA's second all-defense team that season, so he wasn't just a problem for MJ, but for the entire league. Obviously, the Bulls had their typical rotation, as MJ had just finished third in the MVP voting, and Scottie Pippen had just experienced his first season as an NBA All-Star. Both teams knew they were in for a dogfight, as they had split the regular season series at 2 games apiece. Now, a couple things that the 76ers had was attitude and physicality, and they were confident in both of those traits heading into this series. Prior to the series tipping off, Rick Mahorn and Charles Barkley were very vocal about the fact that they were going to establish a quote no layup rule, and said that they would punish Jordan whenever he got to the painted area. Clearly, Mahorn was instilling some of that Detroit culture into his new team. Containing MJ wouldn't be an easy task, as he was extremely hot coming off of their first round victory over the Milwaukee Bucks. When Game 1 began, Philly had no answers for MJ whatsoever, as he dropped 39 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, 5 steals, and 2 blocks on 60% true shooting. He was going to have to continue having performances like that because Charles Barkley was having his own monster series, as he dropped 30 points and 20 rebounds in Game 1. Ultimately, Jordan and the Bulls were too much in the first game, sealing the victory with a final score of 96-85. Philly was convinced that they had to be even more brutal in Game 2. Jordan was once again on fire through 2.5 quarters of Game 2. Towards the end of the third, Mahorn was ready to send a message, and absolutely leveled MJ as he was attacking the basket. This took the intensity of the series to even greater heights, but after the commotion died down, MJ went right back to fearlessly attacking the rim, and was scoring from all areas of the court. Jordan finished Game 2 with 45 points, 8 rebounds, 7 assists, and 3 steals on 57% true shooting. After the 101-96 victory, the Bulls were now up 2-0 in the series. The thing is, the teams were now headed back to Philadelphia, where the 76ers were much stronger in that energetic atmosphere. The Bulls looked sluggish to start Game 3, while Philly seemed as if they couldn't miss. Things got so ugly that the 76ers had a 25-point lead halfway through the second quarter. For a while, things didn't improve by much, and by the end of the third quarter, the Bulls were down by 20 points. While MJ had scored 25. The thing about Michael is that he treated every game like it was a must-win, so he then absolutely exploded in the fourth quarter as the Bulls stormed back with the momentum. Not only was MJ leading the rally, but he was doing it from distance, and eventually he hit this clutch three-pointer to cut the lead to 3 with just about a minute remaining. Ultimately, Chicago fell just short, as the Sixers won the game with a final score of 118-112. MJ scored 24 of his 49 points in the fourth quarter alone, and he also had 5 rebounds, 5 assists, and 4 steals on 64.5 true shooting. The 76ers were now heading into Game 4 looking to tie up the series on their home court, and seemingly their job was about to get a lot easier. Tragically, Scottie Pippen's father had just passed away prior to the tip-off of the 4th game, and due to this, Scottie was going to miss that contest. Now the Bulls were short-handed, both offensively and defensively, and heading into that evening, basically everyone was expecting the 76ers to take full advantage, but the guy on the other side of the court always believed he can win, and he was ready to play like it. As expected, Philly came out of the gate strong, but Jordan was controlling all aspects of the game for his Bulls, as he was scoring or facilitating on nearly every play. It's now late in the third quarter, and the Bulls are down by double digits. Knowing that Michael Jordan was the only serious threat, Mahorn decided to send a message again and hammered Michael as he was attacking the basket. MJ was completely unfazed though, and continued his aggressive play, immediately attacking the basket soon after. If anything, the hard foul only made Jordan more motivated. Once again, MJ erupted in the fourth quarter, closing the gap and eventually taking the lead, as he dropped 18 points in the final 12 minutes. The momentum was theirs, and despite the absence of Scottie Pippen, MJ somehow carried the Bulls to victory and a 3-1 lead in the series. On the night, he had 45 points, 11 assists, 6 rebounds, 2 steals, and 2 blocks on 61% true shooting, in what was one of the most heroic playoff performances of all time. With Pippen now returning to the roster, and with the series now traveling back to Chicago, it seemed as if the series was already over. In Game 5, the Bulls completely dominated in front of their home crowd, closing out the series with a final score of 117-99. And it's worth mentioning that Scottie Pippen had an incredible performance in his first game after his father's passing, as he dropped 29, 6, and 3 on 13 of 17 shooting. MJ was simply MJ, as he dropped 37 points, 9 rebounds, 8 assists, and 6 steals on 65% shooting from the field. Over the 5-game series as a whole, Michael averaged 43 points, 7 rebounds, 7 assists, 4 steals, and 1.2 blocks on absurd efficiency splits. Again, I believe this is the most flawless basketball that MJ has ever played in an entire playoff series. Yet for some reason, very few people ever talk about it. Shawn Travis Kemp. I talked about this before in my Gary Payton video, but sometimes you'll get an NBA legend whose legacy and impact gets somewhat lost in the game's history for one reason or another. In the cases of Kemp and Payton, it's due to the fact that they spent the majority of their Hall of Fame career for a city that literally no longer has an NBA team. Who is there to hang their jerseys, or to give them standing ovations and reminisce about years past? Unfortunately, no one. So their connection to today's NBA fan has become even more hazy. But with this video, hopefully we can remind the basketball community about the impact, uniqueness, and the talent of the great Shawn Kemp. Shawn was drafted with the 17th overall pick in the 1989 NBA draft by the Seattle Supersonics. The athletic 6'10" power forward didn't have very high expectations upon entering the league, since he was only 19 years old and was the NBA's youngest player at the time. He started in just one game of his rookie season and had very modest contributions of 6.5 points and 4.3 rebounds on 48% shooting. The team finished with only a .500 record and missed the playoffs, but it would be in his second season where he would really begin to break out, and a big reason for that was the arrival of their new rookie point guard, Gary Payton. Kemp and Payton had playstyles that were basically tailor-made for one another, as Gary was a quick point guard who consistently wanted to push the tempo for the Sonics, and Kemp, being a young and athletic slasher, was more than happy to oblige. The nickname Lob City came from the LA Clippers of the early 2010s, but if there's a team who deserved that nickname before them, it was certainly the Supersonics of the 1990s, as the Payton and Kemp connection was one of the most frequent and entertaining highlights during that era. With his new facilitator helping him develop, Kemp had very improved sophomore numbers of 15 points, 8.4 rebounds, and 1.5 blocks on 50.8% shooting in just 30 minutes per game. Over the next several years, his game would continue to develop as he slowly improved his footwork and post moves to make him an even better scorer and rebounder. But obviously, what continued to make him stand out was his incredible play above the rim. I recently saw someone say in a comment that Kemp put the power in power forward, and honestly, I couldn't put it any better myself. Everything this guy did on the court looked violent, disrespectful, and authoritative in a good way. From the way he dribbled the basketball to the way he attacked the basket, how he blocked shots, how he dunked the ball, how he embarrassed his opponents, and even straight up taunted them at times. In many ways, he became the symbol of what made Seattle Supersonics basketball special, as his game was loud, energetic, and exciting, just like their audience was in those days. Many young basketball fans today often talk about how they think modern-day players are bigger, stronger, and more athletic than athletes of years past. But apparently, they forgot about the 6'10" Shawn Kemp. From 1993 to 1997, Kemp was selected as an All-Star in all 5 of those years with the Sonics, and in that time, he averaged 18.6 points, 10.7 rebounds, 1.5 steals, and 1.6 blocks on 53% shooting. They made it to the playoffs in each of those seasons and came close to making it to the finals in 1993. But the Sonics wouldn't break through until the 95-96 season, where they won 64 games and were meeting the 72-10 Chicago Bulls in the championship series. I won't go into a ton of details about this series because most of you already know the details. Bulls win the first 3 games, Sonics charge back and win 2, and then the Bulls and Jordan win the iconic Game 6 on Father's Day. But what many people do forget is how special Kemp was in this series, as he averaged 23.3 points, 10 rebounds, 1.3 steals, and 2 blocks on 55% shooting. Pulling off these numbers in this hard-fought, low-scoring series was impressive enough for him to finish as a very close second place in the finals MVP voting. If he had won the award over Jordan, that would have made him only the second player in NBA history to win the finals MVP on the losing team. This was essentially the peak of Kemp's career, because after contract disputes with the Sonics organization and another failed attempt at a deep postseason run, the Sonics traded Kemp to the Cavaliers in the summer of 1997. It was at this time that narratives started to pop up about Kemp's work ethic, because he was noticeably gaining lots of weight with the Cavaliers. Although his 3 seasons with Cleveland were certainly statistically productive, his game had clearly changed, as most of his explosiveness and athleticism from his Seattle days were now gone. After his issues with drugs and drinking became apparent, he wasn't very impactful, and was only in the league for a few more years, playing for the Trailblazers and Magic. By only the age of 33, the once fierce Shawn Kemp had played his final game in his NBA career. So now that we've covered most of his career, let's revisit the question of just how good was Shawn Kemp really? Well, he made 6 All-Star teams and 3 All-NBA teams. He's without question one of the greatest dunkers and alley-oop finishers of all time. And he was a decent defensive player, but never won any awards on that end of the court. He was certainly dangerous anywhere around the painted area and in the fast break, but he was never a consistent threat as a shooter for anything beyond mid-range. He didn't have much longevity to his career, but when he was at his best, he was easily one of the most intimidating and explosive big men the game has ever seen. The NBA Hall of Famer, Dennis Keith Rodman. What if I told you that one of the most fascinating periods of his career is one that many people don't even know about, which was a small window of time filled with many highs, lows, and plenty of controversy. As you all know, the Worm was a 5-time NBA champion who won 2 titles with the Pistons and 3 with the Chicago Bulls. He's one of the top 5 greatest rebounders of all time, and he's one of the top 5 greatest defensive players in NBA history. The vast majority of his career is well documented and well known by the general audience. But contrary to popular belief, there was another fascinating chapter in his story, even after his time with the Bulls. At the end of the 1997 to 1998 NBA season, the Bulls were celebrating their 6th championship in 8 seasons. But the spoils of success were bittersweet, because the Bulls general manager, Jerry Krause, was determined to blow up the very roster that had made his name famous. Phil Jackson was forced out of his head coaching position. Michael Jordan retired in response to Jackson's firing. Scottie Pippen was traded to the Houston Rockets, and the 37-year-old Dennis Rodman was simply cut by the Bulls management, leaving him as a free agent for any potential suitors within the league. The thing is, there was no interest. at least for a while. Yes, Rodman was coming off of recent championship success in Chicago, but he was also remembered for being a locker room headache in his latter years in Detroit and in his 2 seasons in San Antonio. He was also clearly on the decline, as he started in less than half of the Bulls' playoff games in 1998 and didn't start in a single game of the NBA Finals. Not only was he a risk from a chemistry standpoint, but even the upside was now limited due to his quickly increasing age. But alas, one team was desperate enough to make the call: the Los Angeles Lakers. Although the Lakers were certainly one of the most talented teams in the league at the time, to describe them as a work in progress would be an understatement. They had been swept and gentlemen swept out of the last 2 postseasons, and were annually failing to live up to their high expectations. They were a group of dysfunctional egos. Their leader was best described as a giant entitled child, who was as sensitive and demanding as he was playful. Their 20-year-old phenom was anxious to assert himself, and his selfish and showboating approach to the game had often alienated his teammates, causing them to resent him. Their head coach, Kurt Rambis, was a rookie at the position, and he had just replaced the fired Del Harris after 12 games played in the new season. Rambis had no experience as a head coach, and although he was immersed in the players' egos, managing them would be a near impossible task, because he was just starting to get his feet wet with the playbook, let alone the players. On top of all of that, they were now adding the league's most notorious locker room wildcard. And get this, the Lakers were bringing him in with the intention of him being a leader and teaching this team how to win. Yeah, the guy who took Vegas vacations mid-season on the Bulls was now being leaned upon to lead in LA. Many began to question if the Great Western Forum was now becoming a purple and gold circus. To say that the team was split on the acquisition would be an understatement. The Lakers owner, Jerry Buss, was elated to get it done, while their general manager, Jerry West, wasn't thrilled in the slightest. Shaquille O'Neal was thrilled with the move, but the Lakers starting point guard, Derek Harper, said that he thought it was yet another distraction for the team. They say that first impressions are important, and if that's the case, then there's a lot to take away from Rodman's. After plenty of public speculation, Dennis officially announced he was joining the Lakers in a Planet Hollywood casino. Or at least, that's what every reporter in the building expected. He showed up 40 minutes late to his own event alongside of his wife, Carmen Electra. He appeared intoxicated, talked about the great intimacy he was having with his wife, and said that he wanted to play with the Lakers and wanted to play basketball again, as if nothing was agreed upon with the organization. He then told the group of reporters that he only called for a meeting to see if they would show up, and they did. Then a frustrated reporter told Rodman that he was selfish and that he had wasted their time. And then Rodman proceeded to cry and rant about how he's misunderstood. So the reporters never got an official announcement from Dennis. But 2 days later, the world would now know from the media that he had officially become a Los Angeles Laker. The city of Los Angeles had championship expectations for the last several years, and seeing how they hadn't won a title since the Showtime era in the late 80s, they were basically starving at this point. Now, after adding a player who had been a part of the last 3 NBA championship teams, the crowds were electric, as Rodman was rewarded with a standing ovation for basically every play he did right.
Set to 24, he comes in deep, throws up an 8-footer, no, rebound is off, Rodman wants it, Rodman taps the ball to Shaq and he scores. Rodman on a double tip, got the ball to Shaq. No other player on the Laker team could have made that rebound.
He is so good at just tapping the basketball.
Bobby dribble drive, stop, 20-foot jumper and away short. Rebound is off, he's grabbed by Rodman, underneath to Shaq, good feed, Shaq scores. Rodman's second rebound. Look at the people standing, shaking their fists, shaking the building.
A simple rebound, and he gets a standing ovation. That one, the ball bounced right to him, but it didn't matter.
Even his teammates were starting to feel the buzz, as the Lakers were not only clicking with their new addition, but they were winning. They defeated the Clippers in his debut game, and then they comfortably beat Hakeem Olajuwon and the Houston Rockets, with Michael Jordan spectating in the crowd, looking like a proud father. After they won their first 2 games with Rodman in the lineup, Dennis took some time to talk about his leadership with Ahmad Rashad, and even managed to forget his own wife's name for a moment.
Here with Dennis right now. Dennis, there's so much hype, so much hoopla with you coming on this team about you being the answer. You guys should now go straight to the championship. Do you feel any pressure with all that on your shoulders?
I think the last time I felt pressure when I got married. Everyone in this world knows what I can do and what I can bring to a team. I bring excitement, I bring a lot of hustle, enthusiasm, and this team needs something right now. They need a little leadership, and I thought I'd never say that. But, I'm on a different team with good young guys.
Yeah, but you do lead in your own way.
Yeah.
But you have played on some great basketball teams. As you look around you on this team, does this team have the potential of winning NBA championships?
Well, if these guys to keep focused, stay focused every day, and go out there and do what it takes to win. No matter who scores the point, no matter who's the hero that day, just go out there and work together as a team.
And you will be the leader in that area.
Well, I go out there and do what I do. I go out there and play the biggest guys, the toughest guys. They see me go out there doing it every day in and day out. I hope it rubs off.
All right, Dennis, good to see you, man. Good luck to you.
I want to say hello to my wife, Tara Patrick. I hope that you're...
Los Angeles continued their dominating run and started the Worm era with a 10-game winning streak after starting the season with a 6-6 record without him. Over that stretch, Rodman was averaging 10.3 rebounds per game and only 25 minutes of action per night. He got as many as 20 rebounds in a victory over the Clippers. At this point, even Jerry West had changed his tune, as he referred to Rodman as a basketball genius in an interview. You would think, with this much success, that it would be all smiles in the Lakers' locker room. But unfortunately, that wasn't exactly the case, as Rodman missed several team practices, while other teammates complained about the unequal standards that they were held to. Rodman's gambling and party-heavy lifestyle continued, which resulted in public rumors that he was cheating on his wife. Even Shaq, who was initially in favor of bringing in Rodman, was starting to become frustrated with his questionable practices and decision-making, as he would often take naps during team scrimmages and often smelled repulsive, since he only showered before games rather than after. Things would quickly get even more wild. After the 10th straight win, Rodman had to leave the team for personal reasons, and apparently even the head coach Kurt Rambis didn't know why. There were rumors that Rodman had unpaid gambling debts. There were rumors that Elektra was now cheating on him, and there were even rumors that they were getting a divorce. Needless to say, it was a distraction for the Lakers, as Dennis missed their next 3 games, and LA went 1-2 in that stretch. When he returned to the lineup, the Lakers would win their next 2 games over Orlando and Dallas, which meant their winning streak was extended to 12 games when Rodman was in the lineup. As a reward for his play, Rodman was moved to the starting lineup for the first time. But although his minutes may have increased significantly, his level of focus seemed to decrease. The off-the-court drama was starting to affect Rodman's performance, as he was lacking his usual effort defensively, while getting into an excessive amount of on-the-court altercations. He was also now missing every other team practice, as he was less reliable than ever before. All of these headaches may have been tolerable if the Rodman era maintained its dominant start, but after the 12 straight victories, Rodman and the Lakers proceeded to go 6-6, which is the same record they had before he had signed. On April 13th, in a matchup against the Portland Trail Blazers, Dick Stockton and Hubie Brown perfectly summed up what the Rodman experiment had amounted to.
A late report on Dennis Rodman is that he has a sore left elbow and will not play in the second half. And Hubie, everyone talks about how he could be the missing link in the puzzle for the Lakers. I think at this point you'd have to say that his signing has been a detriment to this team, because with all of the problems that he has brought upon this team, missing practice, going off on his own, all of the things, we don't have time to enumerate it. He really hasn't done the job they wanted, the offensive rebounding, as much as he has.
Just think out here. There are 9 power forwards in the West who have played in the Western All-Star game. Now think about that. So he has been dominating now in the last 10 days by Karl Malone, by Weber, by Baker at Seattle, and then by Grant here this evening. Now he is getting destroyed at his strong suit, defense. He cannot control these guys, and he's being out-rebounded. So, he can pout and do all that he wants, but there are no suspensions. So who are you and I? Because they play him and start him the very next game.
In the very next team practice after these comments, Rodman would show up without his shoes or socks, claiming that he didn't know where they were. And that was the last straw for the organization. Rodman was immediately released from the team. In his 23 games in Los Angeles, he averaged 2 points, 11.2 rebounds, and had a total of 11 technical fouls. Although many of the Lakers on that roster were relieved to see him go, one of the guys who didn't want him to leave was actually Kobe Bryant.
Kurt was put in a very tough situation. One, because he was the head coach for the Los Angeles Lakers, first head coaching job, and then you bring in Dennis. Yeah, I'm going to be honest with you. I would love to have Dennis right now. I would love to. Win cures everything. If you don't drop these last 2 games, you're still here.
Now, the 1999 Lakers wouldn't really improve after they released Dennis Rodman. They would finish out the year with 9 wins and 9 losses, including a playoff sweep at the hands of the eventual champions San Antonio Spurs. But during the offseason, the Lakers would hire Phil Jackson to be their new head coach, which would be the dawn of a new and very successful era. According to Rodman, after the Lakers had hired Jackson, he was waiting anxiously by his phone, waiting for a call from the Lakers, since him and Jackson had previously had championship success together. But that call would never come. To me, this is one of the more fascinating and interesting what-ifs in NBA history. Because if you ask me, without question, the 1999 Lakers had a much higher ceiling with Rodman in the lineup. But that team was also like a group of sheep without a shepherd. They desperately needed the calm and composed leadership that Phil Jackson would provide 1 year later, which in Rodman's case was 1 year too late. If Jackson didn't take a 1-year hiatus after his departure from the Bulls and was available for the Lakers to manage the egos, the chemistry, and the drama, then I can only imagine how much more success the Lakers would have had with Dennis Rodman in 1999. Unfortunately, we'll never know for sure.
In the end, who would have thought Carmen Electra would have gotten more out of her marriage to the Worm than did the Lakers?
Clyde the Glide Drexler, one of the great perimeter players of the late 80s and early 90s. This guy has been one of the most requested videos from my viewers, and the main reason is because the older generation who actually witnessed him play seemed to think he was a greater player than the people who have simply heard of him. So in this case, how good was Clyde Drexler really is a very legitimate question. Today we'll be evaluating his career, talent, and legacy starting from the beginning of his NBA days. Clyde Drexler was selected with the 14th overall pick in the 1983 draft by the Portland Trail Blazers. His talent was recognized, but few saw his actual superstar potential, and that in large part is why he wasn't a top 10 pick. Clyde was a lengthy 6'7" shooting guard with incredible athleticism and leaping ability who had a tendency for attacking and finishing around the rim. As his career progressed, he also became a solid 3-point shooter. With that being said, his career got off to a slow start. In his rookie campaign, he was coming off the bench playing only 17 minutes a game, averaging 7.7 points, 2.9 rebounds, and 1.9 assists on 45.1% shooting. The Blazers finished off that year with a 48-34 record before they were eliminated in the first round in 5 games to the Phoenix Suns. Drexler hadn't given the Portland organization much reason yet to be committed to him, which brings us to the 1984 NBA draft. The Blazers were desperate for a legitimate center, which at the time was seen as something that's very necessary for a team to have in order to compete for championships. The Blazers, being not yet overly impressed by Drexler, offered the 2nd overall pick and Drexler to the Houston Rockets for their superstar big man, Ralph Sampson. The Rockets already had the 1st overall pick, meaning that if this trade went through, they would have had the 1st pick, the 2nd pick, and Clyde Drexler, and in all likelihood, they would have taken Hakeem Olajuwon 1st and Michael Jordan 2nd, forming what would have been the greatest big three of all time. The Rockets thought about it and ultimately decided not to accept the trade, which they'll regret for the rest of eternity. The reason I mention this is because it's a key aspect to Drexler's legacy. If the trade had gone through, he certainly would have won more in the long run, but he also would have been relegated to a third option, and we probably wouldn't look back on him as an alpha superstar. The Blazers instead passed up on Jordan and took Sam Bowie second overall as the center they hoped would dominate moving forward. Sadly, he would have numerous injuries, turned out to be a bust, and was not at all the help that Drexler would need moving forward. Despite the missed opportunities, Drexler improved his game and stats across the board, and his team would advance further as a result. In that sophomore year, he averaged 17.2 points, 6 rebounds, 5.5 assists, and 2.2 steals on 49.4% shooting. His Blazers made it to the second round before being eliminated in 5 games by the eventual champion Los Angeles Lakers. He would continue to slowly improve over time, but it wasn't until his 5th year in the league that he reached his full potential as an elite star, as he averaged 27 points, 6.6 rebounds, and 5.8 assists on 50.6% shooting. These fantastic numbers may represent Drexler's best season, but it was only good enough to make him the second best shooting guard in the league. And honestly, that's the issue that made him so underappreciated, was his timing. It's hard to give Drexler much attention for putting up 27, 6, and 6 when Jordan is simultaneously putting up 35, 8, and 8 from the same position while being the MVP and the Defensive Player of the Year. Clyde Drexler isn't appreciated enough by fans today, but the sad truth is, he wasn't even fully appreciated when he was in his prime. From 1988 to 1992, Clyde continued his steady production in his best 5-year stretch of his career from a statistical standpoint, putting up 24.8 points, 6.9 rebounds, 6 assists, 2.2 steals on 49% shooting. His Blazers also made the NBA Finals twice in that 5-year run. The first time came in the 1990 season, where they eventually lost in 5 games to the repeat champion Detroit Pistons, but it certainly wasn't Drexler's fault that they couldn't get it done, because he was a monster in that series, scoring 26.4 points, 7.8 rebounds, and 6.2 assists on 54.3% shooting. The second time came in 1992 when they pushed Jordan's Bulls to 6 games. Unfortunately, this would be the last time that Clyde's Blazers would seriously contend for a title, and after his team would continue to decline for a few more years, Drexler had had enough and had asked for a trade midway through the 1994-95 season. His request was granted, and he was traded to the defending champion yet struggling Houston Rockets. The Rockets were entering those playoffs as an underdog 6th-seeded team. Hakeem Olajuwon was clearly the best player throughout the playoffs, but that season he couldn't have done it without Drexler, who was huge throughout the playoffs, particularly in the first round against the Jazz, where he averaged 25, 7, and 5 on 58% shooting, and in the finals against the Magic, where he averaged nearly 22, 10, and 7 on 45% shooting. Those next few seasons with Houston would be his last, but by the end of his career, he was a former MVP candidate, an NBA champion, a 10-time All-Star, an Olympic gold medalist with the '92 Dream Team, and he was selected in 1996 as one of the 50 greatest players of all time. Very rarely do you hear people praise Clyde for his defense, but he was certainly more than capable, and with his quick hands and instincts, he was often among the league leaders in steals per game. Simply put, he was a winner, a big game performer, and one of the greatest and most underappreciated shooting guards who's ever played the game.
One of the most frustrating things about modern basketball discourse is the way it's devolved into dishonest, mean-spirited, belittling matches. I remember a time where I used to debate my friends and fellow NBA fans, and the aim was to speak highly of my team or my favorite player, in a way that convinces you that they are the best. But nowadays, people think that isn't enough. In the minds of modern fans, what's more important than building up a case for their guy is manufacturing a case to tear down yours. These disingenuous approaches have slowly built up a lot of false narratives about many teams and many players across every era. And unfortunately, after these lies have been regurgitated so many times, it slowly becomes the common belief among the basketball community. Now, I would love to turn this into a series where I expose the lies about things like 60s basketball, 80s basketball, and yes, even the modern NBA. But today, we're looking specifically at a couple of lies about the Bulls dynasty. One of the narratives you constantly hear from fans that want to belittle the Bulls is that their competition wasn't that strong. They, quote, never beat a super team. They think that's a legitimate claim. But even if it was, it's not the win that they think it is. Because the truth is, the Bulls beat the teams that beat the super teams. At the start of the 1996 to 1997 season, the Houston Rockets had formed one of the scariest teams ever seen on paper up till that point, when Charles Barkley joined Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler, just 1 year removed from their most recent championship. Olajuwon was still putting up strong numbers on both ends of the court, while finishing 7th that season in the MVP voting. Charles Barkley was still a 20 points per game scorer, while finishing 2nd in the league that season in rebounds per game, averaging a monstrous 13.5. Clyde Drexler was an all-star as well, with very impressive averages for a third option of 18 points, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, and 2 steals. This was a legitimate super team, and a lot of people thought that Houston would be representing the Western Conference once again in the NBA Finals. And the truth is, contrary to popular belief, they came very, very close. After sweeping Kevin Garnett and the Minnesota Timberwolves in the first round, they then eliminated the defending West champions, the Seattle Supersonics, in a 7-game battle. Then they pushed the Utah Jazz to a 6th game, and it almost went even further, but John Stockton hit a game-winning 3 at the buzzer to send Utah to the NBA Finals. Now, people try to discredit this Rockets team, saying they were old and they never stood a real chance. But that's one of the silliest things that someone could possibly say, and it proves that they lack the proper context. For one, the whole league was old at that point. The 96 to 97 NBA season is tied for the 3rd oldest year in NBA history. This was possible because the pace of play had slowed down to the slowest it had ever been in the game's history. This meant that older veteran players could pace themselves better and last longer into the season in their top form. Yes, Hakeem Olajuwon was 34, Clyde Drexler was 34, and Charles Barkley was 33. But the two teams who made it to the finals were practically the same, as the Jazz were led by the 34-year-old John Stockton, Karl Malone, who was 33, and Jeff Hornacek, who was also 33. Then for Chicago, Michael Jordan was 34, Scottie Pippen was 31, and Dennis Rodman was 35. Basically, all of the best teams in the league were old, and led by stars in their mid-30s. So to then use that against Houston as a way to discredit them as a legitimate threat is completely nonsensical and shows a tremendous amount of bias. Now here's something that might sound even crazier. It wasn't the Jazz or the Rockets who were the Western Conference preseason favorites to make it to the finals in 1997. No, that was actually the Los Angeles Lakers, who just added a prime-age Shaquille O'Neal to an already strong 53-win playoff roster. The core of Los Angeles was a 25-year-old Shaq who averaged 26, 12, 3 assists, and 3 blocks. Their shooting guard was the all-star Eddie Jones, who was one of the best two-way wings in the entire league. Their point guard was Nick the Quick Van Exel, who was one of the most clutch shot makers in the league. He had an incredible handle and was the dazzling main attraction for a couple of years before Shaq showed up. And off the bench, they had a promising young rookie named Kobe Bryant. Even with all of this firepower, the Jazz eliminated these preseason favorite Lakers in the second round in just 5 games. And yet, the Lakers came back the following season even stronger. Now Kobe's game had improved significantly as he finished second in the Sixth Man of the Year voting. Shaq was as good as ever, and even Nick Van Exel and Eddie Jones had improved. This Lakers team won 61 regular season games, and their top 4 players were all selected to be All-Stars. Consider this. This is the only Lakers team in NBA history to have 4 All-Stars on the team simultaneously. The championship expectations had grown even stronger in Los Angeles. And what happened? They ended up getting swept in the Western Conference Finals once again at the hands of the Utah Jazz. This Jazz team, who kept knocking out super teams, was the same Jazz squad that lost to the Bulls in the NBA Finals in 6 games in back-to-back seasons. So yes, the competition the Bulls had at the end of their dynasty was incredibly fierce, regardless of what infantile critics want you to believe. The funny thing is, some of the criticisms they make about age, they also try to apply to the beginning of the Bulls dynasty as well. After 3 straight years of being eliminated by the Detroit Pistons, Chicago had finally developed their roster to a point where they were ready to overthrow the bad boy Pistons. In the 1991 Eastern Conference Finals, the Bulls sent a message by sweeping the Pistons out of the playoffs, with an average margin of victory of 11.5 points. The thing is, biased critics, and even some of the Detroit Pistons players, try to use the excuse that Detroit was old and their time was up. So in other words, the Bulls took advantage of an easy opportunity. But that's just simply not true. Their best player, Isaiah Thomas, was 29, and their second best player, Joe Dumars, was 27, which means that their star tandem that led them to back-to-back championships were in the prime ages of their careers. Dennis Rodman had just won his 2nd straight Defensive Player of the Year award, and he was just 29 as well. Sure, Bill Laimbeer was 33 and Mark Aguirre was 31, but even that is not that old by the NBA standards. Now sure, you can make the excuse that it wasn't really about their age, but it was about their wear and tear of going deep into the playoffs year after year. But what I would say to that is that the 1960s Celtics never needed that excuse. The San Antonio Spurs dynasty never needed that excuse, and even the Chicago Bulls who beat them never needed that excuse, as they remained elite well into their mid-30s. The reality is, people will continue to try to reframe it and use revisionist history to discredit the Chicago Bulls dynasty of the 1990s. But the truth is that their level of competition in that era was incredibly fierce and formidable. They just happened to dominate so hard that it makes it easy to believe that it wasn't.
When it comes to the great centers of NBA history, there are a famous few who hog all of the shine and attention to themselves. For example, the Shaq, Chamberlain, and Hakeems of the world, just to name a few. But then you have a guy like Patrick Ewing, who was a dominant force on both ends of the court, carried his franchise for years, and who ranks high on many of the NBA's all-time statistical lists. Unfortunately, Ewing is one of those legends that never won an NBA championship, and whether it's fair or not, by and large, that's the greatest determining factor in how we separate the icons from simply the great players. Today we're evaluating the talent, nuances, and legacy of a Knicks legend that I'm sure their fans miss very dearly. Patrick was drafted in 1985 with the 1st overall pick by the New York Knicks. When Ewing was entering the NBA, he was 23 years old and was coming off of an extremely successful 4 years with Georgetown University. Ewing was a 7-foot center with a near 8-foot long wingspan. He was a force when attacking the rim, he was skilled with low post moves, and with his reach and athleticism, he was an elite shot blocker. There wasn't anything necessarily flashy about his game, but he was smooth, consistent, and methodical. His rookie year was plagued with injuries, causing him to miss 32 games of his first season. Other than the games he missed, his rookie campaign was quite solid, as he averaged 20 points, 9 rebounds, and 2.1 blocks on 47.4% shooting. With this being said, Patrick and his Knicks were still far from contending in a tough, top-heavy Eastern Conference. After his debut season, his game would slowly continue to improve over time, as would his team's ability to contend. It wasn't until his 4th year in the league that his Knicks finally began to break through, as they finished the 88 and 89 season with a 52 and 30 record. Ewing spearheaded this surge, as he averaged 22.7 points, 9.3 rebounds, and 3.5 blocks on a career-best 56.7% shooting. These Knicks would eventually be eliminated in the semifinals by Jordan's Chicago Bulls. But this was merely a taste of what the Knicks were capable of. As I mentioned earlier, Ewing and the Knicks never won a championship, but it is important to keep in mind that over the next 5 years, from 1990 to 1994, the Knicks were eliminated each year by the eventual NBA champions. The Pistons in 90, the Bulls in 91, 92, and 93, and to the Rockets in 94. Ewing and the Knicks were certainly of elite caliber, they just could never quite make it over the hump. These 5 seasons encompass the prime of Ewing's career, as he averaged 25.6 points, 11.3 rebounds, and 3 blocks on 51.8% shooting during that stretch. Within these years of contending were many ups and downs for Ewing. Due to his shortcomings in the playoffs, many labeled him a choker, like in the 1995 East semifinals when Ewing blew a layup that would have sent Game 7 to overtime, or like the 1994 NBA Finals when Ewing shot under 40% for the series and was greatly outplayed by Hakeem Olajuwon. But let's be honest, what center in the 90s did not get embarrassed by Hakeem Olajuwon? Despite a few crucial instances where Patrick underperformed, there were also times where he came up huge, like in Game 6 of the 1992 Eastern Conference semifinals against the Bulls, where the Knicks were facing elimination and Ewing was dealing with a severe ankle sprain, yet Ewing still scored 27 points, 8 rebounds, and 3 blocks in a Willis Reed-type performance to secure the victory. The truth is, Ewing is somewhere in the middle like most players. He had moments where he came up small in the playoffs, and he had moments where he came up clutch. The difference in how you're remembered is usually defined by whether or not you won championships, and unfortunately, due to Jordan and Olajuwon and ongoing knee issues, he was never able to secure that ring. His Knicks were able to make it to another NBA Finals in 1999, but at that point, he was 36 years old and wasn't the player he once was. He played 17 years in the NBA in total and had career averages of 21 points, 9.8 rebounds, and 2.4 blocks on 50.4% shooting. For his career, he was an 11-time All-Star, made 7 All-NBA teams, and 3 All-Defense teams. The numbers and talent tell us that he's one of the greatest centers to ever live, but I honestly think the narratives about him have made him somewhat underrated.
If he had stayed healthy, Reg, finish that sentence.
First ballot Hall of Famer, easily. I mean, could do everything. I know people like to compare him to Magic Johnson. They were different type, tall guards. Penny was special because he saw the floor like Magic, but I thought he was a better scorer and maybe post-up player than Magic. Remember, him and Shaquille at a young age.
I know.
Penny Hardaway. Remember the Penny Hardaway doll and the whole Tyra Banks thing, and Chris Rock being the voice of the. He was part of the face of the league.
In a 1996 interview, Michael Jordan was asked who he saw as the next Michael Jordan, the guy he would pass the torch to when he does inevitably retire. Michael said 2 players, Grant Hill and Penny Hardaway. Penny was often compared more to Magic Johnson than Michael Jordan, since he was a large point guard standing at 6 foot 7 inches tall. Before Dwayne Wade and Kobe Bryant, Penny Hardaway was the feared wing player alongside of Shaquille O'Neal. He was drafted in 1993 with a 3rd overall pick by the Golden State Warriors, but the Warriors traded Penny and picks to the Magic for the rights to draft Chris Webber. The Magic had originally intended to draft Webber and pair him with Shaq, which is an interesting and rarely talked about what if. But after a second workout with Penny, they changed their mind and decided to make the trade. Upon Penny's first year in the league, he immediately made a significant impact, averaging 16 points, 6.6 assists, 5.4 rebounds, and 2.3 steals on 46.6% shooting. He started the year as a shooting guard, but was mentored at the point guard position by Scott Skiles, who was a wise and solid point guard in his own right, and is still the single game record holder for assists in a game with 30. With his developing skills and Skiles' mentorship, it didn't take very long for Penny to take the next step to superstardom. In only his 2nd year in the league, he was the starting point guard and he helped lead his team to 57 wins while averaging 20.9 points, 7.2 assists, 4.4 rebounds, and 1.7 steals on an extremely point guard efficient 51.2% from the field. It's important to remember that the late 90s had some of the lowest scoring NBA seasons since the 1950s. So if Penny played in just about any other era, his numbers would have looked even better. They topped it off with a trip to the NBA Finals, where they were ultimately swept by the Houston Rockets. But that certainly wasn't Penny's fault. He showed up in the series big, averaging 25.5 points, 8 assists, and 4.8 rebounds on 50% shooting. At this point, as only a 23-year-old, Penny was recognized as a legitimate superstar and as one of the elite players in the league, despite the fact that he was still around 5 years short of his prime. Penny was the perfect example of a retro player who would average monster numbers if he played in today's game. He was a large point guard who could often exploit mismatches with smaller defenders on him. In his early 20s, he was a fantastic ball handler with remarkable court vision and passing abilities. He was a great scorer who was very efficient from the field, and you also had to respect him from three-point range. You also had to be careful with the ball around Penny, as he was usually among the league leaders in steals. Remember, we've covered all of this talent and numbers from Penny so far, and we've still only addressed his first 2 years in the NBA. His third year would be the best of his career, leading his Magic to a 60-22 record while putting up numbers of 21.7 points, 7.1 assists, and 4.3 rebounds on 51.3% shooting. They made it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals this season, but the 72-10 Bulls were on their revenge tour and were way too much for the Magic to handle. Sadly, this would be Penny's last healthy season as a developing superstar. It also marked the offseason where Shaq left the Magic for the Los Angeles Lakers. In the 97-98 season, Penny dealt with a multitude of injuries and only played in 59 games that year. The season after that, he had a devastating left knee injury which required surgery and forced him to miss all but 19 games that year. From this point on, Penny's superstar promise was gone, and although he played 9 more years in the league, he was never an all-star again, and was at best a role player for the Suns, Knicks, and Heat. The truth is, we never saw this man's prime. He was barely 25 years old by the time the injury bug took over, but he could have been a perennial winner and one of the greatest all-around players to ever live if he had simply been more fortunate. Gary Dwayne Payton, also known as the Glove for his ability to cover his opponents. According to basketball legend and Hall of Famer Gail Goodrich, Payton is probably the most complete guard the league has ever seen. Gary was drafted in 1990 with a second overall pick by the Seattle Supersonics. It was there that he built his legendary legacy. Unfortunately, he isn't often remembered and honored as often as he should be, and a lot of this has to do with the fact that his greatest days were with an organization that no longer exists. I mean, it kind of does. I understand that the Oklahoma City Thunder used to be the Seattle Supersonics, but the reality is they now play in a different city with a new fan base under a different name. His legacy just isn't going to be reflected upon as much as it would have been if the organization was still in Seattle. Regardless, today we're taking a moment to reflect on one of the greats of the game and answer the question of just how good was Gary Payton really? Let's start from the beginning. Payton had expectations upon entering the NBA, but he was a bit of a late bloomer. In his rookie campaign, he played 27 minutes a game and averaged just 7.2 points, 6.4 assists, and 3 rebounds on 45% shooting. The following year, his numbers were roughly the same while just slightly increasing his scoring to about 9 points a game. It wasn't until he was 25 years old and entering his 4th year in the league that Payton began to break out as an elite player both offensively and defensively. With Payton coming into his own, alongside of the 6'10 slashing power forward Shawn Kemp, the Sonics soon became an elite basketball team. Before Blake Griffin and Chris Paul were being called Lob City for the Los Angeles Clippers, that's a title that could have belonged to the Payton and Kemp Seattle Supersonics, with Kemp often being on the receiving end of some exciting lob passes from Payton. Not only was this group an exciting fast break team under Payton's lead, but they were also incredibly sound and elite defensively. With this formula, the Sonics went deep into the playoffs several times, like in 1993 when they came just short of the NBA Finals, losing to Charles Barkley's Phoenix Suns in Game 7 of the West Finals. Their best team, though, was easily the 95-96 Supersonics, who were the second best team defensively that season and finished with a 64-18 record through the regular season. The only thing wrong with this group was their timing, because the 95-96 Bulls were on their 72-10 season and are still often considered the greatest team of all time. Remember I said the Sonics were the second best team defensively in 96? Well, they were only behind the 72-10 Bulls that season. Regardless of the fact that they were facing the greatest team of all time in the finals, they still put up a fantastic fight, pushing the Bulls to 6 games. Leading that charge was Gary Payton, who took on the assignment of taking on the world's greatest player in that series, and Gary slowed down MJ like no one else could. Jordan averaged just 27 points that series on a notably inefficient 41.5% shooting. Sure, 27 points a game might seem like a lot, but the truth is, in every other NBA Finals Jordan was in, he averaged comfortably over 30 points per game, while usually shooting above 50% from the field. I get that MJ still won the championship and was still the Finals MVP, But with that being said, no one has ever defended Michael Jordan on the biggest stage as well as Gary Payton did, and that's regardless of the fact that Gary is a couple inches shorter than Jordan. That's a testament to Gary's defense overall that season, as he was the 1996 Defensive Player of the Year. In all of NBA history, Gary Payton is the only point guard to ever win the Defensive Player of the Year award. Gary would also let you hear about it as he shut you down, as he's often recognized as one of the greatest trash talkers in NBA history. During Payton's best stretch of his career, from 1993 to 2003, he averaged 20.8 points, 7.9 assists, 4.5 rebounds, and 2.1 steals on 47% shooting from the field, while usually being the best defensive player on the floor. During that 10-year stretch, he was an all-star 9 out of those 10 years, and he was first-team all-defense 9 out of those 10 years, meaning that he was the best defender at his position for nearly a decade straight. His 9 first-team all-defense selections is the most in NBA history, tied with 3 other players. It's also worth mentioning that load management was not a thing for Gary Payton. Despite the fact that he was often their leading scorer and facilitator while shutting down the opponent's best player just about every night, Payton still never took any voluntary breaks. In his 17-year career, he played in 1,335 games and only missed a grand total of 27 games due to injury. He was a flat-out baller, hard worker, and an Iron Man of a player. It wasn't until the 2005-2006 season with the Miami Heat that Gary Payton finally secured that elusive championship as a part of the Shaq and Wade Miami Heat. Payton had reduced numbers at that point of his career, but people often forget that he was still a key contributing role player to that championship team. So just how good was Gary Payton really? Well, honestly, it just depends on how much you value the defensive end of the floor, which is literally half of the game. Sure, Gary was pretty good on the offensive end at both scoring and facilitating, but in terms of defense, Payton is easily the greatest point guard of all time on that end of the floor. This isn't a video I was originally planning on doing, but it's been a highly requested one, and it can be a fun look at what could have been if Michael Jordan wasn't around dominating the 90s. In theory, Jordan could have played in any era and would have diminished the legacies of his competitors in it. So if anything, hopefully this video will help us appreciate some of the overlooked legends of Jordan's playing days. Now there's a couple different ways to look at a scenario like this. Option 1, you could hypothetically remove Jordan from existence and then speculate the entire ripple and butterfly effect of this move. This literally would change almost everything in the NBA's history since Jordan was drafted. Because if Jordan isn't on the Bulls, then Chicago doesn't win the same amount of games each season, which means draft positions completely change, which means team needs change, which then mean completely different trades and free agency signings are made league-wide. It would totally flip the league upside down. Now there's several NBA YouTubers who have made videos with this specific style, and they're pretty entertaining to a lot of people, but I'm not gonna lie, I really don't like this format too much, because in my opinion, it's way too speculative and completely impossible to accurately guess each ripple effect of the initial change. Now option 2, which is the option I'm going with, is to take the events of the NBA's already written history and simply remove Jordan from that specific timeline, and see how it would have affected the league in a very direct way. So in this video, we'll take a look at 3 aspects, which are the scoring titles, the MVPs, and the championships. Among those, the championships are the only aspect that involves some guesswork, while the others require us to simply look at the runner-up to Jordan in each of those seasons and give him the award as a result. Let's start with the scoring titles. Michael Jordan has by far the most scoring crowns in NBA history with a total of 10. The first 2 seasons, which are 1987 and 1988, now go to one of Jordan's rivals from the Eastern Conference, Dominique Wilkins. He averaged 29 points per game in 87 and 30.7 points in 1988. The human highlight film is now known primarily for his all-time great dunking ability, but back in his prime, he was so much more than just that. Yes, he was an overall incredible athlete, but he was also graceful, had terrific footwork, and was a lethal scorer from the mid-range. It's as Dominique has said about himself before, you don't get over 26,000 points in your career by simply dunking the basketball. The next 4 straight seasons all go to the same player. 1990, 91, 92, and 93 all go to the mailman, Karl Malone, where he averaged 31, 29, 28, and 27 points per game. Karl was obviously a powerful finisher around the rim, but he also had an incredibly smooth jump shot. a lethal combination that translated into him being one of the most dominant scorers of NBA history. The 90s weren't known for their high-scoring numbers, and in the entirety of the 90s decade, Malone was the only player other than Jordan to eclipse 30 points per game for a season. He was offensively lethal at a time where that wasn't very common, and Jordan himself was a major reason why Malone's offensive dominance is rarely noticed or mentioned these days. 1993 brings back a familiar face, as Dominique Wilkins once again takes the scoring crown at 29.9 points per game. This would have been his 4th scoring title of his career. At this point, he was 33 years old and was returning from a torn Achilles, which in combination with his age, strongly decreased his athletic ability. With that being said, he was able to expand upon his game and became a lethal 3-point shooter, shooting 38% from that distance while being 7th in the league in attempts per game. In 1996, the scoring crown now goes to Hakeem Olajuwon at 26.9 points per game. Many remember the Dream, as they should, as one of the greatest defensive players of all time, but many forget just how good he was offensively, as he was capable of leading the league in scoring with his impeccable footwork and his soft touch around the mid-range. In 1997, Karl Malone would have once again won the scoring title at 27.4 points, which takes him from 0 with Jordan to a total of 5 scoring titles without MJ, which would have put him only behind Wilt Chamberlain for the most scoring titles in NBA history. In 1998, Shaquille O'Neal takes the scoring title at 28.3 points. As a 25-year-old, this was around the beginning of Shaq's prime, as he bullied and dominated just about every opponent in the paint. Here's a quick recap of where the scoring titles go now with Jordan out of the picture. Feel free to pause the video for a longer look. Next up, we'll take a look at Jordan's 5 MVPs going elsewhere. The 1988 MVP now goes to the Celtics' Larry Bird, who would have won the MVP in about 95% of other seasons with this kind of performance. He led Boston to a 57-25 record as he put up 29.9 points, 9.3 rebounds, 6.1 assists, and 1.6 steals on 52.7% shooting. He also had a 50-40-90 season, making this the second highest scoring 50-40-90 season of all time. This also would have been his 4th MVP in just a 5-year stretch. The 1991 MVP now goes to Magic Johnson, which was his final full season in the NBA. He led Los Angeles to a 58-24 record while putting up 19.4 points, 12.5 assists, 7 rebounds, and 1.3 steals on 47.7% shooting. This was only the beginning of his impressive 1991 campaign, which was overshadowed by Jordan. We'll get into the rest of his incredible season in a bit. The 1992 MVP now goes to Clyde the Glide Drexler, who led his Blazers to a 57-25 record. Drexler put up a well-rounded 25 points, 6.6 rebounds, 6.7 assists, and 1.8 steals on 47% shooting. It's easy to see why Drexler's legacy gets somewhat overlooked when at best he was simply seen as a discount version of Michael Jordan. Without MJ in the picture, Clyde's legacy becomes one of the biggest beneficiaries of the GOAT's absence. The 1996 MVP now goes to David Robinson, who led the Spurs to a 59-23 record. The 30-year-old was dominant throughout the regular season on both sides of the court. He played in all 82 games and put up 25 points, 12.2 rebounds, 3 assists, and 3.3 blocks on 51.6% shooting. The 1998 MVP now goes to Karl Malone, which in hindsight would give him a total of 3 league MVP awards. Karl led Utah to a 62-20 record, which was tied for the best record in the league. He did it with numbers of 27 points, 10.3 rebounds, 3.9 assists, and 1.2 steals on 53% shooting. Now for likely the most interesting part of the video, which is the championships. This is the only part of the video that involves some analyzed guessing, so let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with these choices. In the 1991 NBA Finals, the Chicago Bulls defeated the Los Angeles Lakers in 5 games, but to get there, they had to beat the Detroit Pistons in the Eastern Conference Finals, which means this hypothetical finals matchup would have been between likely Isaiah Thomas's Pistons and Magic Johnson's Lakers. In my opinion, this would have been a fantastic series, and there's a strong likelihood that it would have gone 7 games. There's this narrative about the 1991 Detroit Pistons that the team was old at this point, and that's why the younger Chicago Bulls swept them out of the East Finals. But that's simply not true. Maybe they were tired and worn down from their 5th straight season with a deep postseason run, but they certainly were not old. At the start of that season, Joe Dumars was 27, Isaiah Thomas was 29, Dennis Rodman was 29, and Bill Laimbeer was 33. Not only were their best players not old, but most of them were at a basketball player's prime age. The Pistons went 50-32 throughout the regular season compared to the Lakers' 58-24 record, so Los Angeles would have had home court advantage, which is definitely significant. They split the regular season series at 1 game apiece, with the Lakers blowing out the Pistons by 24 points in the first game in LA, and the Pistons winning the second game in Detroit by 6 points in overtime. Magic was still performing at an MVP level, and had made an already talented Lakers team look even better with his incredible play. It's worth considering that James Worthy and Byron Scott missed some time in the NBA Finals due to injuries, so those injuries may or may not have occurred against the Pistons, but regardless, Los Angeles was simply playing better team basketball throughout the season. The Lakers won the 1991 championship without Jordan around. In the 1992 NBA Finals, the Chicago Bulls defeated the Portland Trail Blazers in 6 games, but the Bulls defeated the Cleveland Cavaliers in the 92 East Finals, which means the 92 Finals would have been between the Blazers and the Cavaliers. The Cavs of the early 90s are one of the forgotten great teams of that era, as they were led by great players like Brad Daugherty, Larry Nance, and Mark Price. Portland, on the other hand, had one of the deepest teams the Bulls had ever defeated, as they had numerous offensive contributors as well as experienced veterans with all defense team selections. Both teams finished the regular season with a 57-25 record, but the Blazers won both regular season matchups with the Cavs, which means they would be the ones with home court advantage, which was an advantage that meant more in the 90s than it has in recent years. Combine that advantage with their overall depth and postseason experience, and I think the Blazers win the championship in 6 or 7 games. In the 1993 NBA Finals, the Chicago Bulls defeated the Phoenix Suns in 6 games, but the Bulls defeated the New York Knicks in the East Finals in 6 as well. So in this scenario, the NBA Finals are between Patrick Ewing's Knicks and Charles Barkley's Phoenix Suns. The two teams split the regular season series at 1 game apiece, with the Knicks winning a close one at home while the Suns blew them out in Phoenix. The Knicks won 60 games throughout the season and the Suns won 62, meaning Phoenix would have had home court advantage, where they had been extremely dominant throughout the season. Both teams had very deep rosters, but one of the big deciding factors in my mind would have been the superstars up top. People forget that even in a losing effort, Charles Barkley was an absolute monster in the 93 Finals, but he was simply outshined by Michael Jordan. Patrick Ewing, on the other hand, has had some great postseason performances, but he was also famous for folding in many instances where the games mattered most. Put him in a hostile Phoenix environment with a championship on the line, and unfortunately, I'll have a lot more trust in Barkley than I do in Ewing. I think Phoenix wins the championship in 6 games. In the 1996 NBA Finals, the Chicago Bulls defeated the Seattle Supersonics in 6 games, but the Bulls also swept the Orlando Magic in the East Finals, which means the matchup would have been Shaq and Penny's Magic versus Peyton and Kemp's Sonics. This is an extremely fun, hypothetical matchup between two of the greatest teams to fail to win a championship. The Sonics won 64 regular season games, and the Magic won 60. They also split the regular season series with each team winning at home. Now, although the Bulls likely dominate the Magic even if Orlando had been at full strength, it's still worth mentioning that people have forgotten Horace Grant's graphic injury in Game 1 that took him out of the series, so the sweep was a bit easier for the Bulls as a result. Assuming the Magic are at full strength, a matchup with the Sonics would have been an absolute classic series. Shaq is likely having a monster series, as he's taking advantage of the lack of a solid big to defend him, as neither Shawn Kemp or Detlef Schrempf had the size to handle Orlando's center down low. With that being said, other than Chicago, Seattle had the best defense in the league, and a suffocating Gary Payton likely would have been causing all kinds of frustrations for a young Penny Hardaway. Seattle also had a top 10 offense that could play an up-tempo style that would have been difficult for Orlando to handle, especially in the 4 games in Seattle. Ultimately, it would have been an epic series, but I'm going with the Sonics winning the championship in 7 games. In the 1997 NBA Finals, the Chicago Bulls defeated the Utah Jazz in 6 games, but the Bulls also beat the Miami Heat in the East Finals, meaning that the NBA Finals would have been between the Miami Heat and the Utah Jazz. Miami is another one of those great 90s teams that are rarely talked about, as they had a solid core of Tim Hardaway, Jamal Mashburn, and Alonzo Mourning, led by the Hall of Fame head coach, Pat Riley. Miami won 61 games throughout the regular season and the Jazz won 64, and Utah won both matchups in the regular season. It would have been exciting to see two of the strongest players in the league in Alonzo Mourning and Karl Malone meet up in the paint. Especially in the late 90s, Utah was one of the hardest places to win basketball games, so home court advantage once again would have played a huge part. Combine that with Malone having an MVP season, and John Stockton being as reliable as ever, and Miami would have probably been dealing with more than they could handle. I think Utah comfortably wins the championship in 5 or 6 games. In the 1998 NBA Finals, the Chicago Bulls once again defeated the Utah Jazz in 6 games, but the Bulls also beat the Indiana Pacers in the East Finals in 7 games, which makes this new NBA Finals matchup between Reggie Miller's Pacers and Karl Malone's Jazz. Indiana won 58 games throughout the regular season and the Jazz won 62, and the two teams split the regular season series with both games ending in a small deficit. Although the Jazz would have had home court advantage, Indiana would have been fine with that, as they were extremely poised and were a solid road team throughout the 97-98 season. With Karl Malone and John Stockton, Utah certainly had the bigger superstar names, and they bolstered the league's best offense statistically. But Utah was also in the bottom half of the league defensively, and that would have been an issue considering how deep and how many offensive weapons Indiana had between Reggie Miller, Jalen Rose, Mark Jackson, Rick Smits, and Chris Mullin. They could also try to make Utah uncomfortable with their physical enforcers, like Dale Davis and Antonio Davis, who both were once All-Stars. This is the only time where I'm taking a team without home court advantage, as I simply think Indiana was the deeper team and had the perfect play style and roster to counteract the Jazz's offense. The Pacers win the championship in 6 or 7 games. So now that we've come to conclusions on where the accolades and championships would have gone without Jordan in the picture, what are some noteworthy aspects and legacies that now stand out? Well, for one, Karl Malone would have 3 MVPs, 5 scoring titles, and 1 championship, to go along with the fact that he's in the second spot on the all-time scoring list. With this resume, this probably means that Karl Malone is now rivaling Tim Duncan in the argument of the greatest power forward in NBA history. Dominique Wilkins now gets more recognition for his scoring prowess, as he now has 4 scoring titles to his name. Magic Johnson now has 6 rings and closes out his final full season with an MVP, a championship, and likely a Finals MVP. Due to this, maybe he's even leading the pack in the GOAT conversation now. And lastly, Hall of Famers like Clyde Drexler, Charles Barkley, Gary Payton, Shawn Kemp, Karl Malone, John Stockton, and Reggie Miller now all have championship rings in the prime of their careers, which launches each of their legacies to another level. It's amazing how significantly history changes by simply subtracting one really great player. Let me know in the comments section if you agree or disagree with these championship outcomes. Thanks for watching as always. Make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and I'll see you guys in the next video.